January 30th, 2018. It's a Tuesday afternoon in Cambridge, Maryland, a town of 13,000 along the Chesapeake Bay.
It's a very small town, very rural.
Hunting and fishing is a huge thing.
The sleepy seaside community is also steeped in history.
This is literally where Harriet Tubman helped slaves to freedom through the Underground Railroad.
But today, there will be no rescue for one Cambridge resident.
Dorchester County 911, what's the emergency?
He's dead. He's dead.
Okay, who's dead?
My boyfriend.
The caller identifies herself as 39-year-old LaSonia Sargent.
Miss Sargent appeared to be in a great deal of pain.
Have you been shot also? What did you?
Yes.
Okay, where you been shot at, ma'am?
In the chest.
In the chest?
The operator immediately dispatches first responders to the address and attempts to determine what they're walking into.
You know where the suspects are?
No.
You do not know?
No.
Within minutes, the scene is flooded with patrol cars.
When the call came out for shots fired with victims, it's all hands on deck.
With no idea if the shooter is still in the house, the officers approach with caution.
We arrived going in completely blind, so we don't know what to expect.
Cambridge Police!
Down. Subject down. Subject down there.
We would discover Miss Sargent pretty much laying in a pool of her blood on the first floor of the residence, obviously in a lot of pain.
Ma'am, is there anyone else in the house? You don't know? Do you know who did this to you?
Miss Sargent was lying on the floor, so I made my way upstairs where we were advised that there was a male subject who had been shot as well.
Oh, yeah, one on the bed. Second victim upstairs.
It's LaSonia's boyfriend, 35-year-old Sherrod Mack.
I don't have no pulse or nothing on him. Ain't breathing.
New York native Sherrod Mack possessed a large and loving heart.
Even when he was a little baby, all his photos, he's always laughing or smiling.
He was just a loving kid. Some kids grow up and their attitude change, but that wasn't the case with him. He never changed.
All right.
He was very kind-hearted. He always gave instead of trying to gain.
Everyone liked being around him. If I needed anything, honestly, he would be there for me. His sisters could call him up anytime to talk to him, and he was there for them. He was just this loving son and this big brother that we just adored.
Sherrod was so awesome. He's like the family clown. He always made you laugh. I mean, not just laugh, but really belly laugh.
But as close as he was with his family, in 2008, 25-year-old Sherrod decided he needed a change of pace and moved south to Maryland.
I come home from work one day and he had his bag packed and said he was going to Maryland. I tried to get him to stay, but his mind was made up.
He wanted something different. He had friends in Cambridge, so he made the decision to try it out.
He would come back to visit often, but he did really truly enjoy living down there.
Not long after relocating, he found love with a woman named LaSonia Sargent.
They were introduced by a mutual friend, and they just hit it off instantly.
They got along really well. She was going to school to become a nurse.
LaSonia was employed at a assisted living manor located in Easton, Maryland, which is only approximately 15 to 20 minutes away from Cambridge.
It seemed like things were moving in a really good direction. They had bought a new house. They were living together.
And before long, LaSonia had become part of the family.
I truly liked Sonia. We talked often over the phone, and she would keep me up to date pretty much what was going on. And I was really proud of her when she graduated and became a nurse, and was going on to bigger and better things.
So it was no surprise that after 9 years, the couple was still going strong.
They were growing and building together, and things seemed stable, steady.
But now, first responders have just pronounced Sherrod dead, and LaSonia is clinging to life.
Miss Sargent had a gunshot wound to her chest.
Just lay as still as you can, ma'am, okay? EMS will be here in a minute.
And as they wait, officers at the scene suspect they may already know what happened.
They already know Sherrod and his history.
I've been dealing with him ever since I've been here.
The victim was the big-time weed dealer.
He deals like pounds of weed.
So the first thing that they would think is this is related to drugs.
Hey, beautiful.
LaSonia Sargent and Sherrod Mack had built a happy life together.
They were together for about 9 years. They were growing and building together and in a really happy place.
But what appears to be a horrific attack has left Sherrod dead and LaSonia gravely injured.
When the police arrive, she's conscious, but she has what appears to be a gunshot wound to the chest.
Once police clear the scene, medical personnel rush to LaSonia's aid.
All right, sweetheart. We're just gonna roll you, honey. Oh, yep, there it is.
All right.
When you looked at Miss Sargent, you would see a gunshot wound around the heart area, as well as in her back. So it wasn't clear at the time whether she was shot twice, or if this was an entry wound and an exit wound from the same bullet.
I know.
They're rushing to get her treatment and get help.
I'm ready. Come on, I'm ready.
Once loaded into the ambulance, a detective with the Cambridge Police Department rides with LaSonia.
Hey, look at LaSonia.
Detective Phillips accompanied her in an effort to get what we would call a dying declaration, where if she was going to die, which we believed that there was certainly a very large potential that she would, that we would have her tell us who did this.
LaSonia.
But it proves difficult to get any useful information from the gravely injured woman.
I was crammed in the back of the ambulance with other personnel, medical personnel. Miss Sargent's obviously back there in a great deal of pain. They're asking her questions. I'm trying to get answers to questions myself. They're hooking her up to machines. The ambulance is rolling down the street. Everybody in the back of the ambulance is just getting tossed around as well. So it was a very chaotic scene.
They got to shock trauma and she was rushed into surgery.
While doctors fight to save LaSonia, investigators at the crime scene try to piece together what happened.
Do you see where he's shot at? In the ear.
Sherrod had been shot twice in the head.
He was laying on his back in the bed with his head kind of up against the pillows.
There was blood everywhere.
But it appears to police that the victim has been dead for some time.
Blood's dry on his arm. He's cold. He's been here for a while.
The question was how long, and we needed to account for that.
While police had found LaSonia downstairs, investigators believe she had been shot while lying beside Sherrod. Police also discover a gun next to him in the bed.
It was an automatic. It was a .40 caliber.
We did not know who the gun belonged to or how it got there.
However, investigators do suspect it was the weapon used in the shooting.
There was 3 .40 caliber shell casings that were located inside the bedroom.
That's a match for the gun in the bed and potentially the number of gunshot wounds that Sherrod and LaSonia suffered.
And nearby, they find what may have been the killer's true target: an open safe.
I remember there being a safe that had been opened and was empty.
Initially, you think, okay, well, he's been robbed.
And while police saw no signs of forced entry, the killer may not have needed to break in.
The first responding officers There was literally no signs of forced entry. The door was unlocked. They opened it. Nothing appeared out of the ordinary.
The back door was slightly cracked open.
And knowing who their victim is, police suspect the murder was likely drug-related.
Been dealing with him ever since I've been here.
So he deals like pounds of weed.
Working in the area as long as what I did see Sherrod from time to time, and he was never really an issue. He just had his thing that he did.
In my experience, the most violence is over marijuana. That's the biggest market. That's a moneymaker.
Before chasing down their hunch, detectives begin talking to the worried neighbors who'd gathered outside.
It's really a beautiful development. Newer townhomes. I don't recall there ever being a violent felony occurring in that area. So it was highly unusual, this crime in particular, where it took place.
They were canvassing the neighborhood and asking around and just to get information, just to see if someone saw something or heard anything the day that Sherrod was killed.
Have you been home all day? You hear any gunshots?
I remember that being negative for the most part.
However, a few neighbors did report hearing something that sounded like a single gunshot shortly before Lasagna made the 911 call.
After learning what they could from the scene, detectives returned to the station and contact Sherrod's family in New York.
One of the sergeants that was on at the scene told us what happened. That's how I found out.
They were devastated that Mr. Mack was killed in the manner that he was killed in.
I couldn't comprehend it. It was like unbelievable.
Although Sherrod's mother also suspects it had something to do with her son's lifestyle.
He hustled. I had encouraged him to do other things with his life. He could do so much more, but this is the life he chose. I thought it was all connected, that somebody came in and did that.
Because according to Ms. Mack, this wouldn't be the first time Sherrod had been targeted.
Sherrod and Lasagna were the victims of a home invasion a week prior to this incident happening.
What all did he tell you on that?
That someone came in, two guys came in the house with hoodies on.
It was two black males with masks, guns.
And they came in from a downstairs window that was left open.
They ended up stealing quite a bit of money and drugs as well.
They basically robbed him of his money and his cell phone. They took Sonia's laptop.
As the lead investigator, I was thinking, okay, well, maybe this was another home invasion. They came back this time and Sherrod ended up dying and Lasagna was shot as well.
But what Sherrod's mother says next could take the investigation in an entirely new direction.
She put us on to Kimberly Johnson.
According to Sherrod's mom, Kimberly was the woman that her son had been seeing on the side.
Was this a jealousy situation?
Rather than drugs and money, was Sherrod's murder a scorned lover's revenge?
Detectives investigating the shooting that left Sherrod Mack dead and his girlfriend Lasagna Sargent in critical condition have just learned that the couple's relationship wasn't perfect.
His mother revealed that Sherrod was seeing another woman on the side.
Wasn't doing what he should have been doing. And I told her I would help, but that's how I felt about her. I really loved something.
The new information raises the possibility that the shootings weren't drug-related.
Investigations can change at the drop of a hat, and it's almost whiplash.
You have to go where the evidence takes you. Until you know what happened, you don't cancel out anything. You know, everybody is a suspect.
The only eyewitness that can identify the shooter has just been rolled out of surgery.
Eventually, she came out of surgery and came to at some point, was a little like loopy.
The bullet missed her heart by maybe an inch. She had a lacerated lung as well as a broken shoulder blade. But in terms of being near death and on death's door, I believe Miss Sargent was out of the woods at that point.
But Lasagna is still in no shape to talk. So detectives turn their attention to the other woman in Sherrod's life, Kimberly Johnson.
Police were still trying to get information about what was happening with Miss Sargent and her medical condition, but they were still working the case.
Kimberly had an intimate relationship with Mr. Mack for an extended period of time.
Could it have something to do with his murder?
I'm sure you know that you're here because of Sherrod.
During the interview, she appears quite upset about his death.
And she doesn't deny their relationship.
I met Sherrod through my homecoming. We started off as friends, but eventually we started, dealing with each other on a dating level. And he's always had a girlfriend.
Kimberly appreciated the relationship that she was able to have with Mr. Mack and whatever role that was.
I mean, I knew what I was getting myself into, so it wasn't a lot to really argue about because it was like, you signed up for this.
Kimberly seemed to be okay with the arrangement. For the nature of the relationship they had, she did not seem bitter.
Yeah, overall good.
Overall good.
Kimberly also claims that she had no real issues with LaSonia.
She's known for maybe 2 years, maybe. Me and her have spoken.
You guys have already spoken?
And stuff like that. So we know each other very well.
Kimberly seemed to respect the structure of the relationships as they were.
Although she admitted that she and LaSonia weren't always friendly.
The last time I spoke to her, it was just arguments. Like back and forth.
But nothing crazy over the last, nothing spiked or any aggression or anything like that over the last couple of weeks.
She was very upfront about everything and outright denied having anything to do with Sherrod's murder.
But Kimberly claims she's heard rumors about who was behind the murder.
Supposedly out-of-town people.
She then goes on to tell detectives about the home invasion and robbery Sherrod's mother mentioned.
2 guys came to his house and tried to rob him or took some money or something from him that night.
Do you remember what day that was?
It was 2 Sundays ago.
Kimberly said that home invasion terrified Mr. Mack. It made him paranoid. It was because of that he started sleeping with a gun. She could not believe that with all the paranoia that he had, that he would ever let his guard down.
Which, if she was telling the truth, could explain why they found a gun in the bed with Sherrod.
But when detectives ask if Sherrod had any idea who had robbed him, Kimberly says no.
He said that he didn't recognize the people's voices at all.
Then just as detectives are wrapping up the interview, Kimberly adds another wrinkle to the investigation.
He was actually in another relationship with someone else that she knew about.
He has a baby on the way by another woman.
This could turn this whole investigation around.
Do you have any idea why I would want to talk to you?
Not much of our relationship. I am pregnant with his daughter.
Detectives investigating Sherrod Mack's murder have just learned from his lover, Kimberly Johnson, that there was a third woman in his life.
This mistress was actually currently pregnant with his child.
Her name is Tasha Wilkins.
At this point, detectives aren't sure what to think. With the baby on the way, is Tasha unwilling to stay on the sidelines, or is Kimberly angry because Sherrod had someone new?
When a detective sits down with Tasha that afternoon, she doesn't deny that she's carrying Sherrod's child.
Do you have any idea why I would want to talk to you?
Not much of our relationship. I am pregnant with his daughter.
They knew it was a girl, and they had actually did a DNA test. So he knew for sure that the baby was his.
And while Tasha admits to knowing about LaSonia, she insists she had no reason to be jealous.
Well, it was on the outs. It was on the outs before me. It definitely was more so on the outs after the baby situation came.
In fact, Tasha claimed that Sherrod was planning on moving in with her.
it became clear when talking with her, the one thing that he always wanted was a child.
This was his first kid, so he was really excited about the baby.
She actually told us the day of the incident, she and him were supposed to go sign a lease on an apartment together.
But then when I didn't get, the regular good morning text, or how you doing, how you feeling, whatever. So he was up so early, maybe he's asleep. I was just looking forward to hearing from him in the afternoon.
However, Tasha says that when she hadn't heard from Sherrod by that afternoon, she started to worry.
Tasha said that Sherrod seemed preoccupied with something on Monday evening, less than 24 hours before the murder.
He was upset about something. He really didn't get into detail, but he said that he was going to call me, and he didn't.
Tasha says she had sent him a follow-up text later that night.
So you okay? You never called. He was like, yeah, I'm at the gas station, and I just got a lot on my mind. And I think I might have asked him what was going on, or did it have anything to do with me?
She says that he responded no.
They just said no.
They actually said hell no.
So the detectives needed to know what was it that Sherrod had on his mind that night.
Maybe he was scared of another home invasion.
There may be a way to find out. Now in recovery, Lasagna is finally able to speak with detectives.
We all went, shh, thank God. Because we needed that interview.
As soon as they hear that Lasagna is awake, detectives head to the hospital to get a statement.
I'm the investigator of the case. How did this know it's ongoing?
We only had a tape recorder, and he asked her if she was willing to talk to him, and she said she was.
Miss Sargent, can you just basically, start from the top, what happened?
He came in.
No, who came in?
It was 2 or 3 guys.
2 or 3 guys.
They were looking for drugs and money.
That was a week ago?
Maybe.
Lasagna tells detectives that the night of the murder started much the same as the previous home invasion.
You wake up.
To them. Like one that got to my head.
Sonia thought it was the same people that came back and, some people that couldn't finish the job.
They were wearing ski masks so that she didn't get a good look at their faces.
Was it at night? Was it in the morning?
It was like in the wee hours in the morning.
It was very early, and she said it was dark out when this took place.
They came in with like a black gun.
Okay.
And then he took the gun that he had on the dresser.
Lasagna says the intruders forced her out of bed at gunpoint.
So then what happened next?
And they was like, even though you know where it's at, you know where it's at.
She says they ordered her to take them to the drugs.
They brought her downstairs to the living room area.
One of them was still upstairs, and then I heard a gunshot.
Lasagna says that that's when she realized that Sherrod was dead.
I know he gone. I kept telling them we need to go. From the first incident, we need to go.
But when detectives ask Lasagna what happened next, she suddenly shuts down.
Tell us. Trust me, it's nothing we ain't never heard before. I promise. It's nothing we ain't never heard before.
They what?
They raped me.
And when it was over, Lasagna says they brought her back upstairs to the bedroom.
They shoot me. I'm just thinking I'm dead. I'm gone.
Apparently, so did the intruders, who Lasagna said left soon after.
What happened next? Other than what you were thinking, do you remember what you did?
I lay there and watch the ride. I get real close to him. Like, okay, we're just gonna die together.
Lasagna says that she doesn't know how much time passed, only that it was daylight when she woke.
That's when I know, like, I'm not dead.
So, called
911.
And then she had to crawl downstairs to her cell phone to call 911.
Lasagna's story appears to fit the evidence at the scene.
If Lasagna was raped, shot, and then left unconscious for several hours, that could be why Sherrod's blood was dry at the time he was found.
As the lead investigator, I was thinking this was another home invasion.
However, Lasagna's story also offers detectives a chance to identify the intruders.
Because of the nature of the allegation, certain protocols go into effect.
She says they gang raped her. She's, got these injuries. They're doing a rape kit on her.
Until the results come back, detectives are no closer to identifying Sherrod's killer. But then a witness comes forward with a possible tip.
A lot of people had really good relationships with Mr. Mack.
This particular man knew Sherrod from around town.
He tells police he'd seen Sherrod at a local convenience store the night before the murder.
This matches what Sherrod had told Tasha about being at a gas station.
I talked to him, I spoke to him, man. He looked like he got a white car with the dark tinted windows on.
He had never seen that car around before, but thought it might have had New York tags.
Did you see who was in the car with him?
He looked like the lady was pursuing this for their video.
Acting on the tip, detectives request surveillance footage from the convenience store. The video yields some helpful information.
They do see Sherrod with someone in a white car, but they're unable to read the tags.
Hoping the car might return to the market, detectives scan through the tape and make a surprising discovery.
Around 9 o'clock, 9:15 in the morning of the shooting, you can see Miss Sargent heading into the market and buying a pack of cigarettes.
This is, of course, several hours after intruders had supposedly broken into the house.
She's obviously not shot at this point, so we have serious questions.
Detectives investigating the murder of Sherrod Mack and shooting of Lasagna Sargent have just found evidence that suggests a shocking alternative to her home invasion story.
Detectives have just found surveillance footage of Lasagna at a local convenience store, unharmed, several hours after the deadly break-in allegedly occurred.
Maybe Miss Sargent isn't the victim that she wanted to portray. Maybe she was involved in this, and maybe she's somebody that should be considered more seriously for what happened.
But if that was the case, how did she end up shot?
A possible answer begins to emerge when Lasagna's supervisor at the assisted living facility reaches out to detectives.
Detective Jason.
We were able to determine after speaking with the employer, Lasagna was, at first when she was hired, she was a very good employee. She was a hard worker.
But according to her supervisor, that had eventually started to change.
Medication started becoming missing.
Lasagna was pocketing her patients' painkillers.
She had some sort of pill addiction or narcotic addiction.
People use substances to numb themselves from having to even deal with life, deal with the realities of whatever that pain is that they are feeling deep down inside.
But in Lasagna's case, it only made her problems worse.
She was eventually terminated.
She had actually been fired one day before this event.
And on the day of the shooting, her supervisor says she received an eerie voicemail from Lasagna.
It seemed very accusatory. It more or less says to the supervisor that you don't know what people are dealing with. You don't know what kind of circumstances that they have in their life.
It was along the lines of, this is all your fault.
And Lasagna left this message for her supervisor approximately 3 hours before she called 911.
Lasagna had already lost Sherrod to another woman. Now her job too? Her message to her boss made it seem like she felt she had nothing left.
Maybe this was a murder-suicide.
After talking to her supervisor, detectives return to the hospital and confront Lasagna with what they know.
He just went into her, said, "You did it, didn't you?"
This whole thing has come to a head, but there's only really one way that this thing happened.
He points to the loss of the relationship, her job, and the pregnancy as part of her motive.
I know that puts you in a bad frame of mind.
But Lasagna insists that detectives have it all wrong.
I knew of her and of him supposedly getting her pregnant.
She passed it off like she was well aware of that. That was old news.
And we had gotten over it and gotten past it and was working out the issues.
So you're saying that you did not know that he was getting ready to leave?
I did not know nothing about that because he wouldn't leave me. He kept saying he didn't want to leave me.
That's what Lasagna claims. But detectives refuse to back down.
Did you shoot him?
No, sir, I did not.
You're sure?
I'm positive.
You stick to what you're saying. With the evidence that we got, there is no way that anybody's going to believe that. What you're saying is not the truth. I know it and you know it.
I'm done.
Lasagna may be done, but detectives aren't.
I've also got a DNA search warrant for your DNA I'm going to get right now.
They want to see if Lasagna's DNA is found on the gun that was in the bed with Sherrod.
We're going to compare that. And, there's going to be a lot of things forthcoming.
She read that thing over like a fine-tooth comb and was being very reluctant to give up her DNA at that point because she knew the jig was up. We knew it was her.
But before filing formal charges against her, they get even more damning evidence.
Sherrod's family contacts detectives with something that they found after the police turned the crime scene over to them.
I was actually given a cordless phone that had like a built-in voicemail.
There were 11 voicemails saved on the phone from Lasagna.
And there was one message, and I'll never forget it.
Keep on playing games with me if you want to. Keep on thinking everything is a joke. You can try. It's not something,
Detectives investigating Sherrod Mack's murder have just discovered almost a dozen angry messages his girlfriend Lasagna Sargent left on his voicemail in the weeks leading up to his death.
She had told police that their relationship was on a mend, but the messages tell a different story.
Don't hang the phone up on me when I'm talking, Sherrod. It's free and you're a jerk. I just wanted to know what the hell we even together for. Like, why? Why are we still together? Ain't fair. Like, we just sleep in the same house. What the hell are we together for?
Taken together, the messages paint a picture of someone potentially capable of a murder-suicide.
Investigators believe they had more than enough at the time to actually charge Miss Sargent for the murder of Mr. Mack.
And when Lasagna is released from the hospital, detectives are waiting.
Miss Sargent was taken from the hospital and brought to the police department where she would finally be charged with the murder of Mr. Mack.
News of Lasagna's arrest brings mixed emotions for Sherrod's family.
I didn't want to believe it. I'm like, why would she shoot herself? I don't believe that. Why would she shoot themselves in the chest?
I couldn't believe she would have done that. It's just...
When Lasagna goes to trial on August 20th, 2018, prosecutors contend that despite her story about the armed intruders, she was the only shooter in the house that night.
There were strong factors in her decision to take a life.
From the minute that Sherrod had gotten Tasha pregnant, everything started to spiral out of control.
She had lost her job.
Sherrod was moving out.
Things weren't going her way at all.
And sometime during that night of January 29th, Lasagna had reached a fatal decision.
What she came to is, if I can't have you, then nobody can have you.
Based on the evidence, the prosecutors are able to reconstruct what happened next.
She got up early in the morning and my son was asleep. He was asleep when it happened.
While Sherrod slept, she took the gun he kept by the bedside for protection.
She shot Mr. Mack twice in the head.
he had been shot in his ear twice, or in his ear and then a little bit above it. Like, almost like you would shoot somebody in the ear, and then as the gun went off, you didn't expect the recoil and you shot again, and it went a little bit above it.
I'm not sure if Miss Sargent had ever shot a gun before.
Then, with Sherrod dead, LaSonia plotted her next move.
In the early hours of the morning, she had left the house, got into her car, drove to the quick shop where she purchased some cigarettes.
They had videotapes of her going on about her day.
Prosecutors believe she had intended for it to be her last.
She called her boss and left a message that sounded suspiciously like a suicide note.
Then she went back upstairs, laid down in the bed next to Sherrod, and put the gun to her chest.
It was very intentional, there's no doubt about it. She has limited medical expertise. She could shoot herself and not put herself in the dire straits that she put herself in.
But her suicide attempt failed.
The gun jammed because she held the gun too close to her.
Had she not caused that misfire, she likely would have been able to shoot herself again. And clearing a misfire after getting shot near the heart, after lacerating your lung, that's a tall task.
So LaSonia came to another decision.
It was, I'm not dying fast enough. So she was left with little options at that point.
So at that point, I guess she decided that she would try to live.
She was in pain, and so she had to crawl downstairs to her cell phone and called 911 because it hurt.
Evidence from the scene helps to bolster the prosecution's timeline of events.
Sherrod's blood was dry when he was found because he was shot many hours before LaSonia. And neighbors only heard one gunshot shortly before the 911 call because that was when LaSonia shot herself.
Forensics also proved LaSonia was the shooter.
Not only was Ms. Sargent's DNA on the trigger of the gun that was left on the bed, but also her DNA was on the magazine.
And ballistics matched the shell casings found at the scene to Sherrod's gun.
The prosecution also has proof that LaSonia's alleged rape never happened.
From the rape kit, there was semen found inside of Miss Sargent, but it was Mr. Max. So the belief is that around the time of the shooting, maybe the day prior, she potentially had sex with Mr. Mack. But no other semen, no other sources found on Miss Sargent, and no other evidence to suggest that she was violently and brutally raped the way that she described.
When it's the defense's turn, LaSonia sticks with her original story.
She said that it was a home invasion, and she stuck with that story throughout the trial. She never wavered from that story.
But it's a story the jury finds hard to believe.
And that jury came back with a guilty verdict.
The judge, he made a point to let me know that he's gonna make sure she never get out. He gave her a life sentence plus another 20 years, and that was a sense of relief.
She will never see the light of day again. She will die in prison. And that was satisfying to the state.
But even if LaSonia is where she belongs, nothing can undo the horrible damage she's done.
She think that she only destroyed my nephew's life, but she destroyed a lot of people's lives, especially of all his little babies.
I really do feel bad for the child in this situation who never got the opportunity to meet her father.
She only gonna know it. We can tell her the story we can tell her.
And Sherrod's family still struggles to fathom what could have motivated LaSonia to take things so far.
Why she had to kill him. He didn't deserve what happened to him.
It made no sense. It would have been better to walk away.
It's a lesson his family hopes others will take from this tragedy.
If the relationship is not working, it's best to separate.
People look at tragedies like this and they want to know, well, how did this happen? Well, it happened over a long period of time. Things degraded and they got worse and worse. The worst tragedies that we see around us are rarely something that happens spontaneous. There are clues, there are indicators.
If you're not happy, just leave. Don't drag it out. Just get out of that situation before things could take a wrong turn.
London in the bitter autumn of 1990 was a city cloaked in an almost suffocating dread, a sprawling metropolis where the thick, heavy fog rolling off the River Thames seemed to swallow the innocent and harbor the wicked. The gaslights and neon signs flickered against the damp cobblestones, casting long, menacing shadows that danced in the peripheral vision of hurried pedestrians. It was within this labyrinth of damp alleyways and crowded pubs that a nightmare was quietly breathing, a predator moving seamlessly among the millions. A single, chilling detail from that cold November morning remains etched into the very bedrock of Scotland Yard, a macabre tableau that would haunt investigators for 3 agonizing decades. The body of 24-year-old Eleanor Vance was discovered beneath a pile of discarded industrial pallets in a forgotten dead-end street in Soho, her life extinguished with a brutality that defied any rational comprehension. The discovery sent an immediate, visceral shockwave through the city, plunging the tight-knit community into a state of absolute paralysis and fear. This was not a crime of passion, nor a robbery gone wrong. This was the calculated, surgical work of a phantom. Eleanor was a beacon of light in a famously cynical city, an aspiring cellist whose laughter once echoed through the historic halls of the Royal Academy. Her sudden, violent removal from the world created a void that resonated with a profound and heavy sorrow, transforming her from a vibrant artist into a tragic, sensational headline. The crime scene itself was a puzzle composed entirely of missing pieces, a masterclass in forensic evasion that left seasoned detectives staring blankly into the abyss. Rain had washed away the vital footprints, the bitter wind had scattered any trace of fibers, and the absolute silence of the surrounding buildings offered no witnesses to the midnight atrocity. Yet, nestled within the folds of Eleanor's torn coat, investigators found a single, baffling anomaly, a strange clue that would become the maddening centerpiece of the entire investigation. It was a remarkably ornate, silver pocket watch, its hands frozen precisely at 3:14 in the morning, its casing completely devoid of fingerprints. This meticulously polished timepiece did not belong to the victim, and its presence felt less like a piece of evidence and more like a cruel, arrogant signature. The sheer audacity of the crime ignited a firestorm of panic and a desperate, frantic dragnet across the sprawling districts of London. Detectives worked around the clock, their offices thick with cigarette smoke and the suffocating pressure of a terrified public demanding immediate answers. Every known offender, every eccentric local, every passing stranger was dragged under the harsh, unforgiving glare of the interrogation room lights. The city held its breath, expecting the imminent capture of the monster who walked among them, but days bled into weeks, and weeks bled into agonizing months. The prime suspect, a shadowy figure seen arguing with Eleanor outside a pub just hours before her death, evaporated into the dense London smog as if he had never existed at all. It was a mysterious disappearance that baffled the greatest investigative minds in the country, a complete erasure of a human footprint from the face of the earth. The community shock morphed from acute panic into a chronic, lingering paranoia, a collective realization that the person standing next to you could very well be the architect of this unspeakable horror. As the brutal winter of 1990 gave way to a bleak and unpromising spring, the momentum of the investigation hit a devastating and impenetrable wall. The silver pocket watch was analyzed, disassembled, and traced through centuries of horological history, yet it yielded absolutely nothing but dead ends and frustrated sighs. The leads dried up like water on scorching pavement, the frantic tip lines fell entirely silent, and the sensational newspaper headlines slowly shifted their focus to the next tragedy, leaving Eleanor's memory stranded in the shadows. The case files, once the center of intense daily scrutiny, were meticulously organized into cardboard boxes and solemnly carried down into the cavernous, fluorescent-lit archives of Scotland Yard. It was the official birth of a cold case, a bureaucratic term that fails entirely to capture the profound, bleeding wound left behind in the hearts of the victim's family and the weary souls of the detectives who failed her. The frozen hands of that silver watch became a symbol of their monumental failure, a constant, ticking reminder of a killer who had perfectly executed the ultimate crime and vanished. Decades began to slip away, a relentless march of time that transformed the very fabric of the world, while the darkness of 1990 remained perfectly preserved in the basement of the police station. The gritty, analog streets of London were slowly paved over by the shiny, interconnected digital age, a new millennium where the secrets of the past seemed destined to be buried forever under an avalanche of modern data. The original detectives grew old, their hair turning gray, their careers defined and ultimately overshadowed by the ghost of Eleanor Vance, a phantom who paced the corridors of their minds every single night. The killer, somewhere out in the world, was living a life entirely unburdened by consequence, perhaps raising a family, perhaps building a respectable career, wrapped tightly in a flawless, impenetrable 30-year lie. He had survived the advent of DNA testing, he had outlasted the original investigators, and he had confidently assumed that the sands of time had completely buried his monstrous transgression. He believed he was completely invincible, utterly safe behind the massive fortress of years that separated his reality from that bloody night. But the digital age, with its vast, unblinking memory, is a notoriously unforgiving landscape for those who rely on the shadows to survive. The internet birthed a massive, sprawling network of amateur sleuths, historical archivists, and nostalgic citizens who unwittingly began to catalog the entire history of humanity through uploaded photographs and scanned memories. Millions of images from the 1980s and 90s, once deteriorating in dusty photo albums in attics across the country, were suddenly thrust into the bright, unforgiving light of social media. It was an unprecedented digital resurrection of the past, a global interconnected web where a single, seemingly insignificant pixel could theoretically hold the power to unravel a lifetime of careful deception. The killer, entirely comfortable in his analog escape, could never have predicted that the sheer volume of human nostalgia would ultimately become the precise instrument of his spectacular downfall. The past was no longer dead. It was simply waiting to be indexed, searched, and completely exposed by the relentless algorithms of the modern world, waiting for the perfect moment to violently breach the surface of his carefully constructed reality. The seismic shift in this 30-year-old cold case did not come from a brilliant deduction in a police laboratory, nor did it come from a sudden, guilt-ridden confession. It originated on a rainy Tuesday afternoon in 2020 from the glowing screen of a smartphone belonging to a young woman casually scrolling through a public social media group dedicated to vintage photography of the London pub scene. She was merely looking for aesthetic inspiration, swiping past grainy images of smiling crowds, neon beer signs, and the dense, smoky atmosphere of a bygone era. She paused on a candid photograph taken inside a bustling Camden tavern in the late autumn of 1990, an image posted by a retired bartender simply wanting to reminisce about his youth. The foreground of the picture was utterly mundane, featuring three boisterous young men raising their glasses to the camera, their faces flushed with the carefree joy of a Friday night. But the background, slightly out of focus and shrouded in the dim, yellow light of a corner booth, contained a detail so monumentally shocking that it would shatter a 3-decade deadlock. Sitting alone in that shadowy corner, captured purely by accident in the peripheral vision of the camera lens, was a solitary figure nursing a dark pint. As the young woman absent-mindedly zoomed in on the background of the image, the grainy pixels began to form a shape that made the blood run absolutely cold in her veins. Resting prominently on the wooden table, right next to the solitary man's glass, was a highly ornate, silver pocket watch, its distinct casing catching the flash of the camera perfectly. But it was the man himself that delivered the final blow to the mystery, his face turned slightly toward the lens, revealing a very specific, jagged scar across his left jawline, a detail matching the composite sketch of the phantom suspect from 1990. The image was forwarded to Scotland Yard, sparking an explosive frenzy that culminated in a heavy knock on the door of a manicured suburban home. The decades of running were vaporized by an accidental flashbulb, exposing the monster hiding in plain sight. The haunting memories of that cold November morning remain, but the terrifying deadlock is shattered, replaced by the undeniable proof that a single, forgotten photograph can reach across 30 years of silence to deliver justice.
Gemini đã nói.
The pristine manicured lawns of Surrey presented an almost mocking contrast to the grimy, blood-stained cobblestones of Soho that had haunted the minds of investigators for 3 long decades. Here, in this quiet, affluent cul-de-sac, life moved with a predictable, comforting rhythm, a world entirely insulated from the horrific brutality of the 1990 murder. It was a neighborhood of Sunday morning car washes, neighborhood watch meetings, and polite smiles exchanged over neatly trimmed hedgerows. Yet, beneath this flawless veneer of middle-class tranquility, a predator had meticulously built his sanctuary, weaving a 30-year illusion of normalcy that was about to be violently shattered by the ghosts of his past. The unmarked police vehicles rolled down the tree-lined avenue with a predatory silence, their occupants carrying the heavy, solemn weight of a delayed reckoning. The detectives inside, a mix of seasoned veterans who had inherited the cold case and young officers who had only read about the legendary Phantom, felt a palpable, electric tension crackling in the air. This was the culmination of thousands of hours of agonizing dead ends, a moment they had fantasized about but scarcely believed would ever actually materialize. They were not just approaching a suspect. They were marching towards a living, breathing time capsule of pure evil, a man who had confidently assumed he had outrun the long, unforgiving arm of justice. The heavy gray clouds overhead seemed to mirror the impending storm that was about to descend upon this idyllic street, bringing with it the torrential downpour of long-buried truths and inescapable consequences. The heavy, authoritative knock on the solid oak door echoed through the quiet suburban morning like a gunshot, signaling the absolute end of an era of deception. When the door slowly swung open, the man who stood framed in the threshold was a jarring contradiction to the monster described in the heavily redacted police files. He was 65 years old, his hair entirely silver, his posture slightly stooped, radiating the gentle, unassuming aura of a retired accountant or a beloved grandfather. He wore a faded cardigan and held a half-empty mug of tea, his expression morphing from mild confusion to a polite, questioning smile as he surveyed the stern faces of the detectives assembled on his pristine porch. But as the lead investigator stepped forward and spoke the name he had abandoned 30 years ago, the gentle grandfather vanished, replaced in a terrifying fraction of a second by the cold, calculating Phantom of 1990. The color drained completely from his face, leaving behind a sickly, ashen pallor, and the polite smile contorted into a rigid mask of absolute, paralyzing terror. His eyes, suddenly darting and desperate, betrayed the trapped animal hiding beneath the suburban camouflage, an animal that suddenly realized the digital world had constructed an inescapable cage around him. The metallic click of the handcuffs snapping around his wrists was the loudest sound in the world, a definitive, final punctuation mark on a 30-year sentence of unpunished guilt. He did not fight, he did not scream. He simply crumbled under the crushing, monolithic weight of his own history finally catching up to him, the teacup shattering on the porch tiles like the fragile illusion he had spent his entire life building. The immediate aftermath of the arrest sent a cataclysmic shockwave through the previously undisturbed suburban community, plunging his neighbors into a state of profound, nauseating disbelief. The man they had known as a dependable friend, the man who had organized summer barbecues and helped repair neighborhood fences, was abruptly unmasked as the architect of one of London's most notoriously brutal unsolved mysteries. It was a psychological earthquake that violently destabilized their entire perception of reality, forcing them to frantically re-examine every casual conversation, every shared laugh, and every fleeting glance exchanged over the years. The horrifying realization that they had unknowingly welcomed a ruthless killer into their homes, allowing him to interact with their children and share in their daily lives, bred a toxic, lingering paranoia that would forever scar the neighborhood. News vans and hungry journalists descended upon the quiet street like a swarm of locusts, transforming the idyllic cul-de-sac into a chaotic, flashing media circus hungry for every sensational detail of the double life. The headlines screamed across the nation, blasting the mind-bending narrative of a cold-blooded murderer hiding in plain sight, living a life of quiet luxury while his victim's family suffered in agonizing, unending darkness. The community was left grappling with a terrifying existential question. If a monster could wear the face of a gentle neighbor so flawlessly, how could anyone ever truly know the darkness lurking within the souls of the people standing right next to them? The illusion of safety had been violently ripped away, leaving behind a chilling, permanent vulnerability. Inside the sterile, harshly lit confines of the police interrogation room, the atmosphere was suffocatingly dense, heavy with the weight of 3 decades of unanswered questions. The suspect sat hunched across the scarred metal table, his previous suburban confidence entirely evaporated, replaced by the sullen, cornered silence of a predator who has finally been trapped. The detectives opposite him did not yell. They did not slam their fists. Instead, they orchestrated a slow, meticulous, psychological dismantling, weaving a suffocating web of undeniable facts around his fragile, decaying lies. They walked him through the events of that freezing November night in 1990, painting a horrifyingly vivid picture of Eleanor Vance's final moments, forcing him to listen to the agonizing details he had spent half a lifetime trying to suppress. He offered pathetic, reflexive denials, his voice trembling as he clung desperately to the fabricated alibis he had rehearsed 1,000 times in the dark corners of his mind. He claimed mistaken identity. He claimed he had never even been to Soho. He claimed the passage of time had completely distorted the memories of those desperate detectives. But his words rang hollow, bouncing off the cold, unforgiving cinderblock walls, utterly powerless against the monumental tidal wave of evidence that was about to crash down upon him. He was a man fighting a ghost, blindly swinging at the air while the detectives methodically tightened the invisible noose of truth around his neck, preparing to deliver the final, devastating blow. The climax of the interrogation arrived not with a dramatic shout, but with the quiet, deliberate slide of a glossy 8x10 photograph across the scratched metal table. The detective pushed the print directly into the suspect's line of sight, tapping a pen against the shadowy background of the image, right onto the grainy depiction of the ornate silver pocket watch. The suspect's eyes locked onto the photograph, and in that agonizing, breathless silence, the detectives watched the absolute destruction of a man's soul play out across his rapidly aging face. He stared at the jagged scar captured in the pixels, the undeniable, photographic proof of his presence in that Camden tavern, the exact watch that he had so arrogantly left behind at the crime scene. The air in the room seemed to freeze as the monumental reality of the digital age crushed his analog defenses, proving that a random flashbulb fired by a stranger 30 years ago had just become his executioner. The last remaining threads of his composure snapped, his shoulders violently shaking as a hollow, guttural sob erupted from deep within his chest, the sound of a 30-year dam finally collapsing under the unbearable pressure of the truth. There was no grand confession, no cinematic monologue explaining the depths of his depravity. There was only the pathetic, whimpering surrender of a man who realized the universe had never forgotten his sins. The photograph, a silent, unblinking witness from the past, had spoken louder than any witness ever could, delivering a verdict from which there was absolutely no possibility of escape. The news of the arrest reached the scattered, aging cohort of original investigators like a lightning bolt striking a dormant, withered tree, violently reigniting a fire they thought had been extinguished by time and failure. These were men who had carried the crushing weight of Eleanor's unsolved murder into their retirements, the gruesome crime scene photos burned into the backs of their eyelids, disturbing their sleep and poisoning their golden years. When they received the phone calls confirming the impossible, that the phantom had been captured not by brilliant detective work, but by the sheer, accidental miraculousness of social media, their reactions were a complex, chaotic mixture of profound relief and bitter, hollow anger. They gathered in quiet pubs, raising glasses with trembling hands to a victory that felt simultaneously triumphant and absurdly anticlimactic, grappling with the cruel irony that the technology required to catch their white whale had not even existed when the crime was committed. The closure they had desperately sought for 3 decades felt less like a healing balm and more like the ripping off of an incredibly old, deeply scarred scab, exposing raw emotions they had long suppressed. They looked at the photograph of the suspect, a man who had stolen the prime years of their careers, and realized that while justice had ultimately prevailed, the devastating toll of the journey could never be fully repaid or undone. The subsequent trial was a spectacular, sensational media frenzy, a bizarre time warp that violently dragged the neon-soaked horror of the 1990s into the glaring, high-definition spotlight of the modern era. The guilty verdict was delivered swiftly, a decisive strike of the gavel that legally closed the books on the Eleanor Vance murder, finally securing the conviction that had eluded Scotland Yard for over 10,000 days. Yet, for the family of the victim and the detectives whose lives had been consumed by the chase, the concept of closure remained a bitter, entirely elusive illusion. The incarceration of an old man could not reverse the brutal theft of Eleanor's future, it could not erase the decades of agonizing uncertainty, and it could not undo the profound damage inflicted upon the collective psyche of the city. The case serves as a dark, haunting monument to the terrifying patience of justice, a chilling reminder that the past is never truly buried, but merely waiting for the right light to expose its deepest, ugliest secrets. The story of the silver pocket watch and the forgotten photograph echoes through the halls of modern law enforcement, a cautionary tale whispered to those who believe they can outsmart the relentless march of time. The phantom of 1990 is finally locked away in a concrete cell, but the chilling realization that a killer can live among us, smiling and shaking our hands for 30 years, remains a permanent, terrifying specter haunting the edges of our modern world. It is a story that refuses to die, a testament to the enduring power of memory, and a dark promise that the shadows will always, eventually, surrender their secrets to the relentless light.
Gemini đã nói.
The heavy iron doors of the high-security prison slammed shut with a finality that seemed to vibrate through the very fabric of London's legal history, marking the beginning of a life sentence that had been delayed by 33 agonizing years. Inside the sterile, gray walls of the infirmary wing, the man formerly known as the respectable neighbor of Surrey sat in a wheelchair, a shrunken shadow of the predator who had once stalked the neon-drenched streets of Soho with such surgical precision. His presence in the prison system was a logistical anomaly, a geriatric inmate carrying the weight of a youthful, energetic malice that the modern guards found difficult to reconcile with his frail appearance. Yet, the investigators who sat across from him in the final, post-conviction interviews saw past the liver spots and the trembling hands, staring instead into the cold, unblinking eyes of a man who felt no remorse, only a profound, bitter resentment toward the digital world that had betrayed him. He became a living specimen for forensic psychologists, a rare bridge between the analog era of untraceable shadows and the modern era of total surveillance, a man who had successfully navigated the gap for 3 decades only to be tripped up by a single, stray pixel. His silence remained mostly unbroken, a final, spiteful act of defiance against a society that had finally stripped him of his carefully constructed mask, leaving him to rot in a purgatory of his own making where the only company he had were the ghosts of 1990. The ripple effect of the verdict extended far beyond the prison walls, triggering a massive, systematic reevaluation of thousands of cold cases gathering dust in archives across the United Kingdom. Scotland Yard established a dedicated digital forensics unit specifically tasked with scouring the vast, unmapped wilderness of social media archives, vintage photography forums, and digitized family albums from the pre-internet era. This new breed of investigator didn't wear a trench coat or carry a magnifying glass. They sat behind glowing monitors, wielding advanced facial recognition algorithms and AI-enhanced image processing tools to look for the phantoms of the past hidden in the background of 1,000 birthday parties and holiday snapshots. The capture of Eleanor Vance's killer had proven that the world was now a giant, accidental crime scene, a collective memory bank where every citizen with a camera had potentially been an unwitting witness to a crime. Families who had long ago given up hope of seeing justice for their murdered loved ones began to flood the tip lines again, their voices trembling with a newfound, desperate optimism that a similar digital miracle might finally unlock their own personal nightmares. The City of London, once a place where a killer could vanish into the fog and be forgotten, was becoming a transparent grid where the shadows of the past were being systematically illuminated by the relentless, flickering light of a billion screens. In the quiet, suburban streets of Surrey where the killer had lived his lie, the healing process was slow, painful, and fraught with a deep sense of communal betrayal that refused to dissipate. The house where he had resided, once a symbol of domestic stability, stood vacant for months, its windows like empty, accusing eyes staring out at the neighbors who had once called him a friend. Local real estate values fluctuated, but the psychological cost was far higher, as residents found themselves looking at one another with a newfound, cynical scrutiny, wondering what other monsters might be hiding behind the polite veneer of their quiet lives. The neighborhood watch meetings, once focused on petty thefts and stray dogs, were now somber affairs where the conversation inevitably drifted back to the man in the faded cardigan who had fooled them all. They realized that their safety had been a fragile, beautiful illusion, a comfort bought with ignorance, and that the true nature of evil is not a dramatic, recognizable force, but something mundane, quiet, and terrifyingly patient. The garden fences that had once been points of friendly contact became barriers, and the spontaneous street parties of the past were replaced by a cautious, guarded politeness that signaled the permanent death of their collective innocence. For the Vance family, the resolution of the case brought a complex, exhausting brand of peace that felt less like a celebration and more like the end of a long, grueling war of attrition. Eleanor's sister, now a woman in her late 50s with streaks of silver in her hair, spent her days visiting the memorial garden they had planted in North London, a quiet sanctuary of white roses and stone benches. She spoke to the press not with the fiery anger of the early 90s, but with a weary, soft-spoken dignity that moved the nation to tears, reminding the public that while the killer had been caught, the cellist's music had been silenced forever. The silver pocket watch, the instrument of both the crime and the eventual solution, was eventually returned to the family, though they chose to donate it to a museum of forensic history, unable to bear the weight of its presence in their home. They understood that justice is a hollow victory when it arrives so late that the people who needed it most are already gone, yet they found a small, flickering flame of comfort in the knowledge that Eleanor's name would no longer be synonymous with a cold case, but with a triumph of truth over time. Her story became a beacon for the voiceless, a reminder that no matter how deep the burial, the truth possesses a supernatural ability to breathe and eventually claw its way back to the surface. As the years continued to march forward, the London 1990 cold case transitioned from a sensational news story into a legendary chapter of criminal folklore, taught in universities as the definitive example of the intersection between nostalgia and justice. The original detectives, now in the twilight of their lives, found a strange, late-career fame, appearing in documentaries to recount the frustration of the early days and the shock of the final revelation. They often spoke of the phantom suspect as a reminder of their own fallibility, a ghost that had nearly won the ultimate game of hide and seek. The Camden Tavern where the fateful photograph was taken became an unofficial landmark for true crime enthusiasts, a place where people would sit in the same corner booth, looking at the grainy image on their phones and feeling the cold chill of history brushing against their skin. The digital age had not just caught a killer, it had archived the atmosphere of an entire era, ensuring that the fear, the mystery, and the eventual resolution would be preserved with a clarity that the analog world could never have dreamed of achieving. The case was a turning point, a moment when the dark, mysterious past was officially colonized by the bright, unblinking present, leaving no room for the monsters of old to hide. The legacy of the case remains a haunting, permanent fixture in the collective consciousness of the city, a story whispered in the pubs of Soho whenever the fog rolls in thick and the streetlights begin to flicker. It serves as a grim warning to those who believe that the passage of time is a shield, a reminder that every action leaves a digital footprint and every secret is merely waiting for its moment of exposure. The silver pocket watch, frozen forever at 3:14, has become a symbol of the ultimate accountability that awaits us all, a cosmic clock that never truly stops ticking toward the hour of reckoning. Even as the 21st century accelerates into a future of even greater surveillance and technological complexity, the image of that solitary man in the corner of a grainy photograph remains the most powerful image in the archives of Scotland Yard. It is the face of a man who thought he was safe, a man who thought he had outrun the light, only to find that the light had been traveling toward him for 30 years, silent and unstoppable. The haunting memory of Eleanor Vance survives not just as a tragedy, but as a testament to the fact that in the modern world, the dead have found a way to speak, and their voices are louder and clearer than they have ever been before. London today is a city of a million cameras, a place where the shadows are shrinking with every passing second, and yet the essence of the 1990 mystery still lingers in the damp air of the side streets and the hollow echoes of the underground. The case taught us that we are all interconnected by invisible threads of data and memory, and that the person you pass on the street might be carrying a secret that will one day change the world. The phantom is gone, the cellist is remembered, and the silver watch is still, but the story continues to pulse through the veins of the city like a slow-burning fever. It is a narrative of shocking surprise, of a community shattered and rebuilt, and of the incredible, terrifying power of a single, accidental moment captured in time. As we look into the future, we carry the lessons of that cold November morning with us, knowing that while the fog may return, it can no longer protect the wicked from the inevitable, blinding dawn of justice. The case of Eleanor Vance is closed, but the mystery of human darkness remains, a permanent shadow at the edge of our vision, reminding us that the past is never truly behind us. It is always right there, hiding in the background, waiting to be seen. The heavy iron doors of Belmarsh Prison did not just close behind the man who had cheated justice for 3 decades. They seemed to seal a rift in time itself, a violent suturing of a wound that had remained raw and weeping since that fateful night in 1990. Inside the sterile, shadowless corridors where the air smells of industrial floor wax and the metallic tang of despair, the man once known as the Phantom of Soho was now merely inmate number 74902, a frail vessel for a monstrous history. For Detective Inspector Arthur Penhaligon, the man who had inherited the Vance file as a young sergeant and carried it like a lead weight into his twilight years, the final walk down that corridor was not one of triumph, but of a heavy, soul-deep exhaustion. He watched through the reinforced observation glass as the killer, Thomas Thorne, sat motionless in a pool of artificial light, his hands, the same hands that had snuffed out the vibrance of Eleanor Vance, now trembling with the onset of Parkinson's, a cruel and rhythmic ticking of a different kind of clock. There was no grand cinematic confrontation, no final exchange of witty barbs or dramatic confessions. There was only the suffocating silence of 2 old men staring across a divide of 30 years, one representing the relentless persistence of the law, and the other the hollow decay of a life built entirely on a foundation of lies. Thorne's eyes, once described by witnesses as predatory and sharp, were now clouded by cataracts and a bitter, simmering resentment toward a world that had used a single, forgotten digital ghost to dismantle his fortress of suburban anonymity. The psychological profile of Thomas Thorne revealed a man who had not just lived a double life, but had masterfully curated a third, entirely fictional persona that he had eventually come to believe in himself. He had spent 30 years meticulously polishing the edges of his character, becoming the most helpful neighbor, the most reliable employee, and the most invisible citizen, a strategy of hiding in plain sight that had nearly carried him to the grave with his secrets intact. The detectives realized with a chilling clarity that Thorne's greatest weapon was not his brutality, but his absolute, chilling normalcy, a terrifying reminder that the most dangerous predators do not always lurk in the dark, but often stand beside us at the grocery store or wave to us from across the street. The case files, now expanded to include the psychological deconstruction of his 3-decade deception, painted a picture of a man who viewed his crime not as a moral failing, but as a technical error that he had successfully corrected through 30 years of perfect behavior. He had watched the world change from the analog grit of the 1990s to the high-definition transparency of the 2020s with a smug, misplaced confidence, believing that the grainy film of the past could never be decoded by the sharp eyes of the future. He had failed to realize that every moment of his life, every fleeting appearance in the background of a stranger's memory, was being indexed into a global, unblinking archive that would eventually betray him with the cold, mathematical precision of an algorithm. The ripple effect of the Thorne conviction acted as a seismic trigger for the National Crime Agency, leading to the creation of the Digital Archaeology Initiative, a specialized task force that began the monumental task of treating the entire internet as a crime scene. They realized that the millions of photographs uploaded to social media platforms were not just personal memories, but a vast, untapped reservoir of forensic evidence that could potentially solve thousands of cold cases from the pre-digital era. This was the birth of the pixel hunt, a new frontier of detective work where investigators used artificial intelligence to scan the backgrounds of vintage holiday snaps and blurry pub photos, looking for the telltale signs of long-lost fugitives and forgotten witnesses. The case of Eleanor Vance became the foundational text for this new science, a proof of concept that demonstrated how a single, accidental capture of a silver pocket watch could bridge the gap between a forgotten tragedy and a modern courtroom. It transformed the way society viewed its own digital footprint, turning every smartphone user into a potential, unwitting deputy of the law and ensuring that the shadows where killers once hid were being systematically illuminated by a billion flashes of light. The digital ghost of Thomas Thorne, captured in a Camden tavern 3 decades ago, had become the executioner of every other phantom still hiding in the dark, a silent warning that the past is no longer a safe harbor for the guilty. In the quiet, hallowed halls of the Museum of London, the silver pocket watch was eventually placed behind a thick pane of security glass, no longer a piece of evidence in an active investigation, but a sacred artifact of a city's collective trauma and eventual healing. Visitors would stand in hushed silence before the ornate timepiece, its hands still frozen at 3:14, mesmerized by the knowledge that this small, unassuming object had held the key to a 30-year mystery. It stood as a symbol of the terrifying patience of the truth, a physical manifestation of the idea that justice is an inevitable force that moves at its own pace, indifferent to the passage of decades or the changing of the guard. For the students of criminology who flocked to the exhibit, the watch was a reminder that the most significant clues are often the ones that seem the most mundane, and that the success of a case often hinges on the ability of an investigator to see the extraordinary within the ordinary. The watch didn't just tell the time of a murder, it told the story of a city that refused to forget, a community that held its breath for 30 years, and a family that never stopped looking for the light in the darkness. It was the heart of a narrative that spanned generations, a golden thread that connected the analog grief of 1990 to the digital resolution of the modern age. For Eleanor's sister, Sarah, the end of the legal saga did not bring a sudden burst of joy, but rather a slow, quiet receding of a tide of sorrow that had dominated her entire adult life. She found herself sitting in the back of a black cab, driving through the modernized streets of Soho, watching the neon signs of the 21st century flicker against the same old buildings that had witnessed her sister's final moments. The city had moved on. The grit had been scrubbed away by gentrification, and the sounds of the cello had been replaced by the thumping bass of modern nightlife, yet the essence of Eleanor remained woven into the very air she breathed. Sarah realized that her mission was no longer to find a killer, but to preserve a memory, to ensure that Eleanor was remembered not for the way she died, but for the way she lived and the music she created. She established a scholarship in her sister's name at the Royal Academy, ensuring that every year a new generation of cellists would step into the light, their music serving as a living, breathing defiance against the man who had tried to silence their predecessor. The victory was not in the prison sentence, but in the fact that Eleanor's legacy had outlasted the killer's freedom, proving that beauty and art possess a durability that even the most calculated evil cannot hope to match. The final report on the Vance case, bound in a thick, leather folder and placed in the permanent archives of Scotland Yard, was more than just a summary of facts. It was a philosophical treatise on the nature of accountability in a changing world. It detailed the thousands of man-hours, the millions of data points, and the sheer, blind luck that had culminated in the arrest of Thomas Thorne, serving as a humbling reminder to the police force that they are merely instruments of a much larger, more complex process of cosmic justice. The detectives who had worked the case were forever changed, their perspectives shifted by the realization that the most important breakthrough of their careers had come from a random social media post made by a stranger. It fostered a new sense of humility and openness within the force, a recognition that the answers to the most difficult questions are often hidden in plain sight, waiting for the right person to look at them in the right way. The case of the silver pocket watch became a legend, a story told to every new recruit as a lesson in persistence, a reminder that no matter how cold the trail or how old the file, the flame of justice must never be allowed to go out. As the sun sets over the London skyline, casting long, golden shadows across the Thames and painting the city in the same hues that Eleanor Vance might have seen on her final evening, there is a profound sense of a circle finally being closed. The streets of Soho continue to pulse with life, a vibrant, chaotic symphony of human experience that remains indifferent to the tragedies and triumphs of the past, and yet, the ghost of the 1990 cold case remains a permanent part of the city's DNA. It is a story of a silver watch, a forgotten photo, and a killer who thought he was a ghost, but it is also a story about us, about our collective memory, our technological evolution, and our enduring need for the truth. The phantom is in a cell, the watch is in a museum, and the music of the cello continues to echo through the halls of the Academy, a triumphant, soaring melody that rises above the noise of the city and the silence of the grave. We are left with the chilling, beautiful realization that in this interconnected world, nothing is ever truly lost and no one is ever truly forgotten. The past is always watching, waiting for its moment to step into the light, and for the families of the missing and the murdered, that light is the only thing that makes the long, dark night bearable. The case of the London 1990 cold case is officially solved, but the lessons it taught us about the resilience of the human spirit and the inevitability of the truth will resonate for as long as the heart of London continues to beat. The final flickering embers of the life of Thomas Thorne, once the most elusive phantom in the history of Scotland Yard, began to fade within the sterile, whitewashed walls of the high-security medical wing, a place where the air itself seemed thick with a clinical scent of antiseptic and the heavy, stagnant weight of inevitable decay. He was no longer the arrogant architect of a perfect murder or the polished suburban neighbor with a manicured lawn. He was a skeletal figure swallowed by the oversized proportions of a prison-issued gown, his breathing a ragged, rhythmic wheeze that mirrored the mechanical ticking of the very watch that had betrayed him. The doctors noted his rapid decline with a detached, professional apathy, for in the eyes of the state and the public, he was already a ghost, a relic of a darker age who had been dragged kicking and screaming into a future that had no room for his brand of analog shadows. Outside his window, the modern world continued its frantic, high-definition pace, a world of instant connectivity and total transparency that Thorne could never truly comprehend, a world where his 30-year fortress of silence had been dismantled by a single, accidental digital echo. He lay there in the quiet hours of the night, perhaps haunted by the image of a silver pocket watch or the soaring notes of a cello that he had tried so desperately to silence, a man whose legacy was now defined not by his cleverness, but by the spectacular, humiliating nature of his exposure. The Vance Unit, as the Digital Forensics Division at Scotland Yard had come to be known, had evolved into a sophisticated, multinational operation that utilized the latest breakthroughs in artificial intelligence to scan the vast, unmapped archives of the human experience. The case of the London 1990 cold case had provided the ultimate proof of concept, a blueprint for a new era of justice, where time was no longer an obstacle but a collaborator, a repository of data waiting to be mined by the relentless algorithms of the 21st century. Investigators were no longer just searching for fingerprints on physical objects. They were searching for patterns in the background of billions of uploaded images, looking for the glint of a watch, the specific curve of a jawline, or the unique gait of a man walking through a crowd 3 decades ago. This digital panopticon had created a world where the monsters of the past were being systematically flushed out of their hiding spots, their carefully constructed lives collapsing under the weight of a collective, global memory that never slept and never forgot. The legacy of Eleanor Vance was no longer just a story of tragedy and resolution. It was the catalyst for a fundamental shift in the power dynamic between the hunter and the hunted, a declaration that the shadows were no longer a safe harbor for those who would commit unspeakable acts of violence. In the archives of the Royal Academy of Music, a special digital repository was created to house every surviving recording of Eleanor's performances, a project that utilized advanced audio restoration techniques to bring her music back to life with a clarity that had been lost to time. When the first restored tracks were released to the public, the hauntingly beautiful resonance of her cello filled the airwaves once more, a triumphant, melodic return that felt like a final, definitive victory over the man who had tried to erase her from existence. People who had never known her, who were not even born when she took her final walk through the streets of Soho, found themselves moved to tears by the depth and passion of her artistry, connecting with the soul of a woman who had become a symbol of resilience and the enduring power of the human spirit. The contrast was stark and profound. While Thomas Thorne rotted in a prison cell, his name becoming a footnote in the annals of criminal pathology, Eleanor's music was experiencing a global resurrection, her voice reaching out from the past to touch the hearts of millions. It was the ultimate poetic justice, a realization that while life can be stolen in a moment of senseless brutality, the essence of a person, their talent, their passion, and their impact on the world, is an immortal force that no killer can ever truly extinguish. The final interview with Thomas Thorne, conducted by a young, ambitious psychologist just days before his death, yielded no grand revelations or moments of profound insight into the nature of his depravity. He remained a man of small, petty grievances, his mind a cluttered attic of justifications and lies that he had repeated so often he had come to believe them as absolute truths. When asked about the night in 1990, he didn't speak of remorse or the weight of his guilt. He spoke of the weather, the coldness of the rain, and the unfairness of the digital world that had conspired to rob him of his golden years. He was the personification of the banality of evil, a man who viewed himself as a victim of a technological revolution rather than a perpetrator of a heinous crime. The psychologist noted that Thorne's greatest fear was not death, but the realization that he was no longer special, that his carefully crafted mystery had been solved by a random stranger with a smartphone, a thought that seemed to inflict more pain than any prison sentence ever could. He died in the early hours of a Tuesday morning, the same day of the week the fateful photograph had been discovered, a quiet, unremarkable end for a man who had lived a life of extraordinary deception. As the news of Thorne's death filtered out to the public, there was no outpouring of grief or even a sense of significant closure, for the City of London had already moved on, the story of the cold case having transitioned into the realm of legend and academic study. The silver pocket watch remained in its glass case at the museum, a silent witness to a history that continued to ripple through the lives of everyone involved, a constant reminder of the fragility of secrets in the age of information. Detective Inspector Arthur Penhaligon, now fully retired and living a quiet life by the coast, received the news with a simple, stoic nod of his head, a final, heavy chapter of his life officially coming to an end. He sat on a bench overlooking the English Channel, the same water that Thorne had once looked at from his suburban home, and felt a profound sense of peace that had eluded him for over 3 decades. The phantom was gone, the file was closed, and for the first time in 33 years, the ghosts of 1990 were finally at rest, their whispers silenced by the definitive finality of a grave and the enduring clarity of the truth. The streets of Soho, once the dark and dangerous playground of a faceless predator, were now a vibrant, neon-drenched hub of culture and commerce, a place where the history of the past was being constantly rewritten by the energy of the present. Yet, if you walk down that forgotten dead-end street near the heart of the district on a cold, damp evening in November, you might still feel a lingering chill that has nothing to do with the weather. It is the residue of a tragedy that defined a generation, a haunting echo of a night when the light of a promising young artist was extinguished by a man who thought he could outrun the sun. The city remembers, even if the individual voices have faded, for the story of Eleanor Vance is now part of the bedrock of London, a tale of mystery, shock, and the eventual, inevitable triumph of justice. It is a story that teaches us that we are all being watched, not by a malevolent force, but by the collective memory of humanity, and that every act of kindness and every act of cruelty is being recorded in a way that will eventually be brought to light. In the final assessment of the case, the most striking detail was not the brutality of the crime or the length of the deception, but the sheer, beautiful randomness of the solution. It was a reminder that the universe has a way of balancing the scales, that a single, accidental moment captured in a blurry photograph can undo 30 years of meticulous planning and cold-blooded execution. It was a victory for the ordinary people, the amateur sleuths, the nostalgic bartenders, and the curious scrollers, who unwittingly became the instruments of a higher justice. The digital age did not just create a panopticon, it created a community of witnesses who are always watching, always remembering, and always waiting for the moment when the truth can finally be told. The London 1990 cold case is no longer a mystery to be solved, but a lesson to be learned, a dark and compelling narrative that reminds us that while the path to justice may be long and winding, it always leads to the same, inescapable destination. As we conclude this journey into the heart of one of London's most notorious mysteries, we are left with the image of Eleanor Vance's cello, its polished wood gleaming in the light of a concert hall, its voice soaring above the noise of the city. It is a sound that transcends time and space, a melody that speaks of beauty, hope, and the ultimate victory of life over death. The Phantom of Thorn is gone, swallowed by the darkness of his own making, but the music of Eleanor remains, a permanent, glowing fixture in the cultural landscape of the world. The silver watch may have stopped at 3:14, but the clock of justice continues to tick, relentless and unstoppable force that ensures that no matter how long the night, the dawn will always come. This is the final word on the case of 1990, a story that began with a chilling discovery in the fog and ended with the definitive, blinding light of the truth, leaving us with the haunting, beautiful knowledge that the past is never truly dead and that justice, however delayed, is always, eventually, absolute. The silence that followed the death of Thomas Thorne was not the silence of peace, but the heavy, expectant hush that precedes a second, more devastating storm. While the world believed the book on the Soho Phantom was closed, a specialized team of forensic architects and structural investigators was about to peel back the literal layers of his suburban sanctuary in Surrey, revealing a hidden geometry of malice that extended far beyond a single night in 1990. It began with a routine clearance of the property, a standard procedure for the estate of a deceased inmate with no living heirs, but it quickly escalated into a high-stakes excavation when a ground-penetrating radar scan intended for a new patio installation flagged a series of anomalous hollows beneath the concrete floor of the detached garage. The air in the quiet cul-de-sac turned frigid once more as the police tape went up, a familiar yellow barrier that signaled the return of a nightmare the neighbors thought had been buried with the old man. The pristine, white-painted walls of the garage were systematically dismantled, revealing not just the skeletal frame of a building, but a meticulously constructed, soundproofed void that had been hidden behind a false back for over a quarter of a century. This was not a storage space. It was a museum of shadows, a cold, dry chamber where the humidity was carefully controlled to preserve a collection of items that made the seasoned detectives gag on the metallic taste of pure, distilled evil. Inside this secret vault, the beam of a high-powered forensic flashlight cut through the darkness to reveal a series of neatly organized, industrial-grade plastic bins, each one labeled with a date and a set of geographical coordinates that spanned the entire length of the 1980s and 90s. As the first lid was lifted, the investigators didn't find the jewelry or cash associated with typical robberies, but instead, they discovered an array of deeply personal, mundane objects that told a story of a systematic and relentless predator who had treated his victims as mere entries in a morbid ledger. There were bus tickets, pressed flowers, single earrings, and locks of hair preserved in acid-free envelopes, each item a silent scream from a life that had been interrupted by Thorne's surgical cruelty. But it was the final bin, tucked into the very back of the chamber, that delivered the most visceral shock to the investigative team, for it contained a stack of neatly typed journals, thousands of pages of a man's descent into madness, written with the cold, detached precision of a laboratory report. Thorne had not just killed, he had observed, he had documented, and he had relished in the lingering terror he left in his wake, creating a comprehensive map of a secret London that lived beneath the surface of the respectable city. The community shock, which had begun to subside after his arrest, was violently reignited as the realization dawned that Eleanor Vance was not the beginning or the end of his spree, but merely the one mistake in a career of flawless, silent annihilation. The journals revealed a terrifying insight into the mind of a man who viewed the digital revolution not as a threat, but as a fascinating new landscape for a different kind of hunt. He had written extensively about the early days of the internet, documenting his transition from a physical stalker to a digital voyeur, using the anonymity of early chat rooms and bulletin boards to track the descendants of his previous victims. He had become an invisible presence in their lives, a digital ghost watching from the periphery as they mourned, as they grew, and as they unknowingly lived in the shadow of the man who had destroyed their families. This was a new breed of horror, a realization that Thorne's 30-year lie was not just a defensive crouch, but an active, ongoing offensive against the memories of those he had harmed. The Digital Archaeology Initiative was forced to pivot, shifting their focus from the grainy photographs of the past to the encrypted data trails of the early 2000s, discovering that Thorne had maintained a network of secret cloud storage accounts filled with surveillance footage taken from a distance. The depth of his obsession was staggering, a monumental architecture of voyeurism that proved he had never truly stopped being the predator of Soho. He had simply evolved with the technology, becoming a more sophisticated, more elusive phantom that haunted the very airwaves. As the detectives waded through the thousands of pages of Thorne's journals, a name began to appear with a haunting, rhythmic frequency, a name that was not in any of the official cold case files, but resonated with a chilling familiarity. It was the name of a young woman who had disappeared from a crowded train station in 1992, a case that had been dismissed at the time as a runaway situation due to her troubled background. Thorne's detailed accounts of her final hours provided the missing pieces to a puzzle that had been ignored for 34 years, revealing the locations of remains that had been hidden in the thick, overgrown woods of the Green Belt. This was the moment the Vance case truly transformed into a national tragedy, a seismic shift that forced the legal system to acknowledge that the silence of the past was often a choice made by those in power. The sensational headlines returned with a vengeance, screaming about the Surrey secrets and the Journal of a Monster, as the public struggled to comprehend how one man could harbor such a vast, unmapped ocean of darkness while maintaining the facade of a gentle neighbor. The community was left in a state of absolute paralysis, a collective vertigo as they realized that the monster they had finally caught was only the tip of an iceberg that extended deep into the forgotten corners of their history. The emotional climax of this new investigation arrived when the families of the newly identified victims were finally called to Scotland Yard, not for another round of fruitless questioning, but to receive the definitive, agonizing truth that had been denied to them for decades. The scenes in the briefing rooms were a chaotic symphony of grief and relief, a visceral outpouring of emotion that seemed to vibrate through the very walls of the building. For some, the news was a release from the purgatory of uncertainty, a chance to finally lay their loved ones to rest with the dignity they deserved. For others, it was a fresh, jagged wound, a realization that their pain had been a source of amusement for a man who lived just a few miles away. The presence of Eleanor Vance's sister, Sarah, became a unifying force for these families, a veteran of a similar war who offered a silent, steadfast support that no government official could provide. She understood better than anyone that the solving of a case is not a destination, but a new, more difficult beginning, a journey through a landscape of memories that are now permanently altered by the light of the truth. The lingering impact of Thorne's journals created a new kind of haunting, a realization that the past is not a static place, but a living, breathing entity that can still reach out and pull you back into the darkness. In the wake of these discoveries, the Museum of London was forced to update its exhibit, adding the journals and the mundane trophies to the display alongside the silver pocket watch, creating a more comprehensive and terrifying portrait of the man who had haunted the city. The exhibit was no longer just about a single crime. It was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the terrifying persistence of evil. Visitors would spend hours reading the digitized excerpts of the journals, their faces illuminated by the glow of the touchscreens as they grappled with the reality of Thorne's meticulous depravity. The silver watch, once the centerpiece of the story, now felt like a minor detail in a much larger, much darker tapestry, a single frozen moment in a lifetime of calculated cruelty. The study of the case became mandatory for new recruits, not as a success story of modern forensics, but as a cautionary tale about the dangers of complacency and the necessity of looking beyond the obvious. They were taught that the most dangerous secrets are often hidden in the most mundane places, and that the true measure of a detective is not the ability to catch a killer, but the courage to follow the darkness to its very end, no matter how deep it goes. The Surrey house was eventually demolished, the physical structure razed to the ground as if the community could simply erase the memory of Thorne by destroying his sanctuary. Yet, the void he left behind remained, a psychic scar on the landscape that no amount of landscaping or new construction could truly hide. The neighbors would often glance at the empty lot as they walked their dogs or drove to work, a silent, heavy reminder of the man who had lived among them for 30 years with a heart full of shadows. The story of the London 1990 cold case had become a permanent part of the city's mythology, a dark folktale that was told and retold, each iteration adding a new layer of complexity and horror. It was a story that reminded everyone that justice is a long, slow-burning fire, one that can take decades to reach its full intensity, but eventually consumes everything in its path. The Phantom was dead, his journals were archived, and his victims were finally being brought home, but the echoes of his crimes continued to pulse through the city like a slow, rhythmic heartbeat, a constant reminder that the past is never truly finished with us. As the final entries of the journals were indexed and the last of the remains were recovered from the woods, the city of London felt a sense of heavy, exhausted closure that was different from the sharp triumph of the initial arrest. This was a peace born of total exposure, a realization that there were no more secrets to hide, no more shadows for the Phantom to inhabit. The music of Eleanor Vance continued to play in the halls of the Academy, but it was now joined by the silent, remembered voices of the others, a collective symphony of lives that had been reclaimed from the darkness. The silver pocket watch remained in its case, its hands still frozen at 3:14, a symbol of the moment the world stopped for one woman and the moment the clock began to tick for a killer. The legacy of the case is a haunting promise that in the modern world, the truth is an inescapable force, a digital and physical light that will eventually find its way into the deepest, darkest corners of the human soul. We are left with the knowledge that while we may never truly understand the mind of a man like Thomas Thorne, we have the power to ensure that his victims are never forgotten and that their stories are told with the clarity and dignity they deserve. The Soho Phantom is gone, but the lessons of 1990 remain, a permanent fixture in our collective consciousness, reminding us to watch the shadows, to remember the missing, and to never, ever stop looking for the light. This is the end of the narrative, a final, definitive closing of the file, leaving behind a city that is a little more transparent, a little more just, and forever changed by the ghost of a silver watch and the memory of a woman who refused to be forgotten. The heavy, rhythmic thrum of the modern city of London carries within its pulse a hidden frequency, a vibration of unresolved histories and digital ghosts that refuse to be silenced by the passage of time. We stand now at the final threshold of a narrative that has spanned 36 years, a story that began in the suffocating autumn fog of 1990 and culminated in the blinding, clinical light of 21st century forensic science. The death of Thomas Thorne in his prison cell did not mark the end of the investigation, but rather the beginning of a total historical reckoning, a moment when the Vance Protocol became the gold standard for international law enforcement. This legislative and technical revolution was born from the realization that every human being living in the modern world is a walking archive, an unwitting curator of a shared history where the background of a simple family photograph can hold the key to a monstrous secret. Scotland Yard's Digital Archaeology Unit, once a fledgling experiment, has expanded into a monolithic intelligence hub, a place where the air is constantly cooled to protect rows of humming servers that sift through billions of pixels every single second. These investigators are the sentinels of the past, using artificial intelligence to cross-reference the journals of a dead killer against the metadata of a billion lives, ensuring that no shadow remains unmapped and no victim remains anonymous. The physical site of Thomas Thorne's deception in Surrey has been transformed from a scene of horror into a silent, hollowed-out void, a patch of land where the soil itself was sifted through forensic screens to find even the smallest fragment of truth. The neighbors who once shared tea and pleasantries with a predator have largely moved away, unable to bear the weight of the silence that now occupies that space, but the vacancy serves as a permanent memorial to the fragility of our perceptions. The Surrey secrets, as the media dubbed them, were not just crimes of the flesh, but crimes against the very fabric of communal trust, proving that the most terrifying monsters do not growl from the darkness, but smile from the light. This realization has fundamentally altered the social landscape of the city, breeding a new kind of digital awareness where the nostalgia of the 1980s and 90s is tempered by the knowledge that the past was a landscape of unchecked predators. The journals found in that hidden bunker have been digitized and analyzed by behavioral psychologists, providing a map of human depravity that will be studied for decades to come, ensuring that the warning signs Thorne so expertly hid will never be overlooked again. As the digital archaeology unit pushed further into the encrypted archives Thorne left behind, they began to recover the Silent Seven, a group of victims whose names had been lost to the bureaucratic indifference of the late 20th century. These were the runaways, the marginalized, and the forgotten souls who Thorne had hunted because he knew the world would not look for them, but the digital age has proven him wrong. One by one, their stories have been pieced together from a single bus ticket found in a bin or a grainy surveillance image pulled from a defunct transit server, their identities restored to them in a series of somber, televised ceremonies that moved the nation to its core. These were the people Eleanor Vance helped to save from the absolute void, her own tragedy serving as the lighthouse that eventually brought their memories home to their families. The resolution of these cases has created a global ripple effect, with cities like New York, Paris, and Tokyo establishing their own Vance units to scour their historical archives for the phantoms who thought they had escaped into the analog sunset. This is the new reality of justice. It is no longer a sprint to the finish line, but a marathon through the data of a century. Relentless pursuit that proves that in the age of information, there is no such thing as a clean getaway. In the hallowed, echo-filled halls of the Royal Academy of Music, the legacy of Eleanor Vance has taken on a physical and spiritual form that transcends the grim details of her death. The Eleanor Vance Memorial Concert Hall was inaugurated last year, a space of glass and light where the acoustics are designed to perfectly capture the deep, mournful, and yet hopeful resonance of the cello. Every time a bow is drawn across strings in that room, it is a direct act of defiance against the man who tried to silence that sound, a melodic confirmation that art is more durable than malice, and that memory is more powerful than murder. Sarah Vance, now a matriarch of a family that grew up in the shadow of this mystery, sits in the front row of every performance, her face a map of the 36 years she spent fighting for her sister. She no longer looks for the killer in the faces of strangers. She looks for Eleanor in the eyes of the young musicians who carry her legacy forward, realizing that while justice was delayed, the impact of Eleanor's life has been amplified by the very struggle to remember her. The scholarship founded in her name has produced some of the finest musicians in Europe, each one a living testament to the idea that beauty can grow from the harshest, coldest soil of tragedy. The silver pocket watch, the ornate timepiece that started it all, remains the most visited artifact in the Museum of London's Modern History Wing, sitting in its climate-controlled case like a heart that stopped beating but refused to disappear. It has become a philosophical totem for a city that is obsessed with time, a reminder that the frozen second of a crime can eventually thaw under the heat of a persistent truth. Visitors of all ages stand before it in a state of quiet contemplation, looking at the hand stuck forever at 3:14 and realizing that their own lives are being recorded in ways they cannot yet imagine. The watch is a witness, a silent observer of a city that transitioned from the analog fog into the digital glare, and its presence serves as a warning to anyone who believes they can hide their darkness from the future. It is a symbol of the ultimate accountability that awaits us all, a reminder that the universe has a long memory and a very specific way of balancing the scales when we least expect it. The watch doesn't just tell the time of a murder, it tells the time of a revolution, marking the exact moment when the shadows lost their power over the city. The investigators who lived and breathed the Vance case have mostly retired now, their hair white and their voices gravelly with the weight of the things they have seen, yet they remain connected by an invisible thread of shared experience. They meet once a year at a small pub in Soho, not far from the alleyway where it all began, to raise a glass to the woman they never knew, but whose life defined their careers. They speak of the Phantom of Soho not as a monster to be feared, but as a lesson to be remembered, a man whose defeat proved that the collective will of a society to find the truth is stronger than any individual's desire to hide it. They look out the windows at the bustling, neon-lit streets of modern London and see a city that is safer, not just because of more cameras, but because of a deeper, more profound understanding of the value of every human life. They have seen the darkness of 1990 be replaced by the clarity of 26, and they carry that peace with them into their final years, knowing that they left the world a little more transparent than they found it. As we reach the final seconds of this long, cinematic journey through the heart of an unsolved mystery, we are left with a vision of London as a city of light, a place where the fog may still roll off the Thames, but it can no longer swallow the innocent without consequence. The story of the Silver Watch, the forgotten photo, the journals of a predator, and the music of a cellist has come to its natural and definitive conclusion. It is a story that reminds us that we are never truly alone, that our actions ripple through time in ways we can never predict, and that the light of truth is an unstoppable force that will eventually find its way into every corner of the human experience. The files are closed, the evidence is archived, and the ghosts are finally at peace, leaving us with a world that is more connected, more aware, and more just because of the struggle to solve a 36-year-old cold case. The past is no longer a place of fear. It is a library of lessons, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the absolute, unyielding power of the truth. The final image we carry is of a single, silver watch resting in a beam of sunlight, its hands still, its casing bright, and its story told in full to a world that will never forget. London in 2026 is a city that has reclaimed its history from the shadows, a city that knows that every pixel matters, every memory counts, and every life is worth the decades of searching. The haunting melody of a cello fades into the distance, a soaring and triumphant sound that rises above the skyline and dissolves into the stars, marking the end of the narrative and the beginning of a future where the darkness has no place to hide. This is the ultimate resolution of the London 1990 cold case, a journey from the depths of despair to the heights of justice, proving that time is not a barrier to the truth, but the very vessel that brings it home. The story is finished, the phantom is forgotten, and the light remains, steady and eternal, shining on a city that finally knows the whole truth. The year is 2026, and the world of criminal investigation has been forever altered by the seismic aftershocks of the Eleanor Vance resolution. Yet just as the dust seemed to settle on the legacy of the Soho Phantom, a new and even more terrifying digital ghost has emerged from the depths of the encrypted void. It began in a nondescript data center on the outskirts of Reykjavik, where a routine decommissioning of an ancient, third-party cloud server triggered an automated security alert that bypassed every standard protocol and landed directly on the desk of the lead investigator at the Vance unit in London. Within the hidden architecture of that server lay a single, heavily encrypted directory titled with a sequence of numbers that matched the precise coordinates of the alleyway where Eleanor's body was discovered 36 years ago. This was not a remnant of a forgotten investigation or a piece of stray metadata. It was a digital dead man's switch, a final, arrogant gift from Thomas Thorne that he had set to activate years after his own death. The sensation of a cold case being solved twice was unheard of, yet the forensic coders at Scotland Yard felt a familiar, visceral dread as they began the agonizing process of peeling back the layers of this final, binary shroud. What they found inside was a revelation that would not only rewrite the history of the 1990 murder, but would shatter the collective sense of security that the city had fought so hard to rebuild. The file contained a single, high-definition video restoration of a handheld recording taken on that freezing November night, captured from a perspective that the detectives had never dared to imagine. It was a first-person view of the crime scene, recorded through an experimental, high-sensitivity lens that Thorne had stolen from a laboratory months prior, providing a chillingly clear window into the heart of the darkness. The footage did not just depict the brutality of the act. It revealed a second figure standing in the shadows, a silent witness who had been cropped out of every photograph and missed by every forensic sweep for over 3 decades. This second phantom stood perfectly still, watching the horror unfold with a detached, clinical observation that suggested Thorne was not working alone, but was instead an instrument for someone even more calculating and elusive. The community shock that had been simmering since the discovery of the journals erupted into a full-blown firestorm of paranoia as the realization dawned that a second killer, perhaps younger and even more disciplined than Thorne, was still walking the streets of London. The news headlines screamed of a shadow syndicate and the hidden hand, transforming the resolution of a cold case into the beginning of a terrifying new manhunt that spanned the globe. The strange clue that had baffled investigators for years, the silver pocket watch with its hands frozen at 3:14, was finally given its true, horrific context within the frames of this newly discovered footage. As the camera panned across the frozen scene, the second figure stepped forward and placed the watch into Eleanor's coat pocket, but the video revealed a detail that the physical evidence had never surrendered. The watch was not ticking forward, but was instead being manually wound backward by the figure in the shadows. This was a symbolic ritual, a statement of intent that Thorne's partner was winding back time on the City of London, a signature of a cult-like obsession with the preservation of misery that extended far beyond a simple murder. The digital excavation of Thorne's hidden server revealed a network of encrypted communications that stretched into the highest levels of the 1990s social elite, suggesting that the Soho Phantom was merely the visible tip of a much larger, much more insidious iceberg. The investigation was no longer just about a single cold case. It was an archaeological dig into the corrupted soul of a city, a search for the architect who had directed Thorne's hand and ensured his anonymity for 30 years. As the Vance Protocol was pushed to its absolute limits, the team utilized a revolutionary new AI technique known as genetic digital reconstruction, which analyzed the reflection in the silver watch's polished casing captured in the high-definition video. Through thousands of hours of algorithmic processing, the AI managed to reconstruct the face of the second figure, a face that belonged to a man who is currently a prominent figure in international philanthropy and global security. The revelation was a cataclysmic explosion in the world of true crime news, a twist of the century that saw a beloved public figure unmasked as the silent partner of the century's most notorious serial killer. The arrest was executed with the same surgical precision that the killers had once used, a coordinated global strike that brought the architect to his knees in the middle of a high-profile charity gala. The image of the silver handcuffs snapping around the wrists of a man who thought he was untouchable became the definitive symbol of the 2026 legal landscape, a victory for the digital age over the analog shadows of the past. The city held its breath as the trial of the century began, a proceedings that promised to expose the final, darkest secrets of the 1990 London underworld. The impact on Sarah Vance was a complex, overwhelming tidal wave of emotion that threatened to drown the peace she had so painstakingly constructed over the years. To find out that her sister's death was not the act of a lone madman, but part of a calculated, elitist conspiracy, was a fresh and jagged violation that required a new kind of strength to survive. Yet, she stood as a pillar of dignity in the midst of the media circus, her voice a steady and unforgiving reminder that the truth is not a luxury, but a fundamental right that must be defended at any cost. She became the face of the Global Justice Initiative, a movement that demanded the total transparency of all historical data, ensuring that no secret society or powerful individual could ever again hide behind the curtain of time. The music of Eleanor's cello took on a new, more powerful meaning during this period, evolving from a song of mourning into a symphony of justice, a melodic war cry that resonated through the courtrooms and the streets of London alike. The city was no longer just remembering a victim, it was honoring a catalyst for a global revolution in accountability, a woman whose name had become synonymous with the inevitable triumph of the light. The Vance Protocol was put to its most significant test when it was used to solve a high-profile kidnapping that occurred in the spring of 2026, a case that shared a chillingly similar signature to the Soho Phantom's early work. Using the same predictive algorithms and digital archaeological tools that had unmasked Thorne and the architect, investigators were able to locate the victim within 48 hours, preventing a tragedy before it could even begin. This was the ultimate validation of the legacy of Eleanor Vance, a proof that her death had not been in vain, but had instead provided the world with the weapons it needed to fight the monsters of the future. The Vance units across the globe were now operating as a unified front, a digital shield that protected the innocent from the predators who still believed they could operate in the shadows of the past. The era of the unsolved case was officially coming to an end, replaced by a world of total forensic visibility, where the long arm of the law was equipped with the unblinking eyes of 1 billion cameras and the infinite memory of 1,000 servers. The final emotional climax of this epic saga arrived on a quiet evening in late November, on the 36th anniversary of Eleanor's death, when the City of London held a moment of silence that was joined by millions of people across the planet. In the center of Soho, on the very spot where the nightmare began, a permanent light installation was unveiled, a beam of pure, brilliant white light that shot into the night sky, symbolizing the final and absolute victory of the truth. The silver pocket watch, still frozen at 3:14, was returned to the museum, but it was now accompanied by a digital plaque that told the full, unvarnished story of the conspiracy, the journals, the second phantom, and the ultimate reckoning. It stood as a monument to the resilience of the human spirit and the terrifying, beautiful patience of justice, a reminder that while the darkness may be deep and the silence may be long, the light is always traveling toward us, silent and unstoppable. The community was no longer paralyzed by fear. It was empowered by the knowledge that they were part of a world where the truth could no longer be buried, a world where the ghosts of the past had finally been given their voices. As the final notes of a cello concerto echoed through the streets of London, the narrative of the 1990 cold case reached its true and final conclusion, a story that had transformed from a sensational crime news broadcast into a legendary testament to the power of memory. The phantom was dead, the architect was in chains, and the victims had been brought home, leaving behind a city that was a little brighter, a little safer, and forever changed by the legacy of a woman who refused to stay hidden in the fog. The history of London had been rewritten in the ink of truth, a permanent record of a battle between the old world of shadows and the new world of light, a battle that the light had won with a decisive and magnificent finality. We are left with the image of a city at peace, its neon lights reflecting on the damp cobblestones not as a warning of danger, but as a celebration of transparency, a city where the secrets of the past have finally been laid to rest. The case of Eleanor Vance is officially closed, her music continues to play, and the silver watch remains still, a golden anchor in the shifting sands of time, marking the end of the mystery and the beginning of a future where justice is truly and finally absolute. The grand marble halls of the Old Bailey had never witnessed a fall from grace quite as spectacular or as gut-wrenching as the final conviction of the man the world now whispered about as the architect, a figure whose arrest in 2026 had effectively torn the final, jagged veil from the face of a 36-year-old nightmare. As the heavy mahogany doors of the courtroom swung shut for the last time, the silence that descended upon the City of London was not the quiet of peace, but the heavy, suffocating stillness of a collective realization that the monster was not just a ghost from 1990, but a pillar of the very society that claimed to seek justice. The trial had been a harrowing, high-definition descent into a labyrinth of corruption that stretched from the rain-slicked alleyways of Soho to the highest glass towers of global influence, revealing a conspiracy of silence that had protected Thomas Thorne and his patron for over 3 decades. Evidence presented in the final days of the hearing was so visceral and so profoundly disturbing that it necessitated a new classification of criminal depravity, a psychological landscape where human lives were treated as mere variables in a grand, sadistic experiment of control. The silver pocket watch, once a mysterious anomaly in a cold case file, was finally understood as the primary instrument of a ritualistic obsession with the manipulation of time, a symbol of the architect's arrogant belief that he could freeze the world at the exact moment of its greatest agony. The sentencing of this second phantom was the definitive climax of the Vance Protocol, a moment when the digital archaeology of the past finally caught up to the physical reality of the present, leaving no room for the escape of the elite. Yet, even as the architect was led away to a life of absolute isolation, the investigators at Scotland Yard were confronted with a final, chilling revelation that threatened to unhinge the very foundations of their victory. During the final forensic sweep of the architect's subterranean estate, a hidden vault was discovered that contained not just digital files or physical trophies, but a wall of identical silver pocket watches, hundreds of them, each one engraved with a unique date and time spanning the last 40 years. This was the ultimate shock, a mysterious clue that suggested the Soho Phantom and his director were not isolated incidents, but part of an international syndicate of timekeepers who had been operating in the shadows of major global cities for decades. The discovery sent a new wave of community shock through the world, as families of the missing from New York to Tokyo began to demand their own digital reckonings, realizing that their loved ones might also be frozen in the collection of a similar predator. The London 1990 cold case had not just been solved, it had become the key to unlocking a global archive of untold horrors, transforming the story of Eleanor Vance into the first chapter of a much larger, more terrifying narrative of historical accountability. As the sun began to set over a transformed London in the spring of 2026, the city found itself grappling with a profound existential crisis, a lingering shock that no courtroom verdict could fully alleviate. The Vance effect had created a society that was hyper-aware of its own history, a community where every old photograph and every discarded memory was now scrutinized for the fingerprints of the wicked. This total transparency brought with it a heavy psychological toll, a collective paranoia that the past was still hiding secrets that would eventually explode into the present with the same devastating force as the Thorne revelation. The neighborhood in Surrey where the killer had lived for 30 years remained a ghost town, the empty lots and boarded-up windows serving as a permanent, physical scar on the landscape, a reminder that evil does not always look like a monster, but often looks like a friendly neighbor who never misses a Sunday car wash. The community was no longer the same. The casual trust that had once defined British suburban life had been replaced by a cautious, digital-first scrutiny, a world where the long arm of the law was now equipped with the infinite memory of 1,000 servers. The silence of the streets was a testament to the price of safety, a recognition that in the age of the Vance Protocol, the only way to be truly safe was to be entirely visible, a reality that left many feeling exposed and vulnerable in a way they had never experienced before. Eleanor Vance's sister, Sarah, became the unintended guardian of this new world, a woman whose tireless pursuit of the truth had inadvertently triggered a global revolution in forensic justice. She stood on the balcony of the Royal Academy of Music, looking out at the city that had both failed and eventually vindicated her sister, feeling the weight of the thousands of families who now looked to her for guidance. The music of Eleanor's cello continued to play in the halls behind her, a soaring, triumphant melody that had become the unofficial anthem of the Global Justice Initiative, but Sarah knew that the music also carried a deep, underlying sorrow that could never be erased. She realized that while the architect and Thorne were gone, the legacy of their crimes would continue to resonate through the lives of the survivors for generations, a haunting memory that was now a permanent part of the city's psychological bedrock. The final victory was not in the incarceration of the killers, but in the fact that the world had finally learned to look into the shadows and name the darkness for what it was, a feat of collective bravery that had been decades in the making. The London cold case was a closed file, but the story of Eleanor Vance had evolved into a living, breathing testament to the resilience of the human spirit, a reminder that even the deepest fog cannot forever hide the light of a determined truth. The silver pocket watch, the object that had haunted the dreams of detectives and the memories of a family for 36 years, was eventually moved to a high-security vault within the National Archives, no longer an exhibit for the public, but a classified artifact of the timekeeper conspiracy. It remained frozen at 314, a permanent puncture in the fabric of time that served as a warning to all future generations about the dangers of unchecked power and the terrifying patience of the predator. The watch was a strange clue that had finally led to the heart of the labyrinth, a golden anchor that had held firm while the world around it changed from the analog grid of the 90s to the digital clarity of 26. It stood as a symbol of the moment the clock stopped for Eleanor and the moment it began to tick for the men who killed her, a cosmic balance that had taken nearly 4 decades to achieve. The investigators who had devoted their lives to the case often visited the vault in their final years, looking at the watch not with the frustration of the past, but with the quiet, somber satisfaction of men who had seen the light finally win. They understood that the watch was a bridge between 2 eras, a physical manifestation of the journey from the shadows of Soho to the transparency of the modern world. The final emotional climax of the series arrived on a rainy evening in Soho, on the exact spot where Eleanor's body had been found 36 years ago, as the city unveiled a new kind of memorial. It was not a statue of bronze or stone, but a digital projection of a cello made of light, a shimmering, ethereal presence that seemed to vibrate with the very sound of her music. As the rain fell through the light, it created a prismatic effect that filled the alleyway with a kaleidoscope of colors, transforming a place of horror into a sanctuary of beauty and remembrance. Thousands of people gathered in the surrounding streets, standing in a silence so profound it seemed to pull the very air from the city, a collective act of mourning that transcended time and space. Sarah Vance stood in the center of the alley, her hand resting on the spot where her sister had taken her final breath, and for the first time in 36 years, she felt a sense of absolute, unburdened peace. The phantom was gone, the architect was silenced, and the city had finally, definitively, remembered the woman who had started it all. The light of the cello rose higher and higher into the London sky, a brilliant, white beacon that could be seen from every corner of the metropolis, signaling the end of the narrative and the beginning of a future where the truth was the only light that mattered. The haunting memories of the 1990 cold case remain, woven into the very bricks and mortar of London, a permanent shadow that serves as a reminder of the price of justice and the value of every single life. The city has moved on, the technology has evolved, and the faces of the people in the streets have changed, but the essence of the mystery continues to pulse through the veins of the community like a slow-burning fire. It is a story of sensational crime, of shocking surprise, and of a mystery that was solved not by a single act of brilliance, but by the relentless, collective memory of a world that refused to let go. We are left with the chilling, beautiful knowledge that the past is never truly behind us, that it is always there, waiting in the background of a photograph or the ticking of a silver watch, ready to be seen by the right eyes at the right time. The London cold case of 1990 is no longer a question, but an answer, a definitive statement on the power of the human spirit to overcome even the most calculated and historical evil. The story is complete, the music is eternal, and the truth is finally, and forever, absolute, shining like a beacon in the night for all who seek the light. This is the end of the narrative, the final closing of the file, leaving behind a world that is a little brighter, a little safer, and forever changed by the ghost of a silver watch and the memory of Eleanor Vance. The final, shattering blow to the global syndicate of shadows did not arrive with a dramatic explosion or a frantic police raid, but with a quiet, terminal hum of 1,000 high-performance servers in North London finishing their exhaustive calculation of the absolute truth. By the midsummer of 2026, the Vance Protocol had officially evolved from a local investigative experiment into a monolithic, planetary digital dragnet, one that had successfully dragged the last of the architect's conspirators from the deep-sea trenches of their encrypted havens and into the blinding light of public accountability. The sensational news broadcasts that had once speculated on a lone killer in a Soho alleyway were now replaced by live, high-definition streams of justice being delivered in real time across 12 time zones, a global reckoning that proved the era of the cold case was a mere glitch in a history of human progress. This was the final, irreversible death of the secret, a digital apocalypse that ensured that no amount of wealth, influence, or historical distance could ever again shield a predator from the unblinking eye of the collective human memory. The community shock that had initially paralyzed a small cul-de-sac in Surrey had transformed into a profound, global awakening, a realization that the safety of our shared future was inextricably linked to the total and uncompromising exposure of our shared past. In every major city, from the neon-lit corridors of Tokyo to the sun-drenched plazas of Madrid, the story of the cellist and the silver watch became the foundational myth of a new age, a cautionary tale that reminded every citizen that their most private moments were part of a larger, indestructible tapestry of human history. The architect, sitting in his soundproofed, high-security cell, was forced to watch his life's work, his grand, sadistic experiment in the manipulation of time and terror, be methodically dismantled and archived by the very technology he had once thought he could outsmart with his analog cunning. The strange clue of the silver pocket watch had finally yielded its most terrifying and magnificent secret, revealing that it was not just a trophy of a single murder, but a sophisticated, ritualistic synchronization device used by a network of predators to coordinate their interventions across the globe. As the final watches were recovered from secret vaults beneath the streets of Paris, Berlin, and New York, the sheer scale of the operation sent a visceral, bone-chilling shudder through the hearts of every investigator who had ever touched the Vance file. These weren't just crimes of opportunity. They were calculated strikes against the soul of society, a systematic effort to create pockets of unresolved trauma that the syndicate could exploit for their own twisted sense of dominion. Yet, the digital archaeology of 2026 had proven to be a force of nature, a technological tidal wave that scoured the deepest recesses of the historical record and left no stone unturned in its quest for the light. The final forensic report, a massive, multi-terabyte document that was instantly made public, served as a definitive funeral oration for the Age of Secrets, a declaration that the shadows had finally been defeated by the light of a billion interconnected eyes and the relentless persistence of the human spirit. The pixel hunters of the Vance unit had become the new sentinels of justice, using genetic digital reconstruction to bring the victims of the 80s and 90s back into the light, ensuring that their names would never again be whispered in the darkness of a cold case archive. The emotional climax of this 3-decade saga arrived when Sarah Vance was invited to the United Nations to oversee the official synchronization, a global event where every digital clock in the world paused for precisely 1 minute at 3:14 in the morning, London time. During this minute of absolute, planetary silence, the sound of Eleanor's restored cello was broadcast across every frequency, every speaker, and every digital device on Earth, a soaring, celestial melody that seemed to weave through the very fabric of the atmosphere. It was a moment of profound, collective healing, a realization that while one life had been stolen in an alleyway in Soho, its resonance had grown to fill the entire world with a message of hope and absolute accountability. The haunting memory of the cold case had been transformed into a global anthem of justice, reminder that the dead are never truly gone as long as their music is heard and their stories are told with the clarity of the truth. Sarah stood at the podium, not as a victim sister, but as the architect of a new kind of peace, a woman who had used her grief to light a fire that had consumed the darkest corners of human history and left behind a world that was a little brighter and a little safer for everyone. The city of London itself has become a living, breathing monument to this transformation, a metropolis of glass and light where the Vance effect is visible in every interaction and every street corner, a place where the shadows are no longer a source of fear but a reminder of how far we have come. The alleyway in Soho where the nightmare began is no longer a place of dread, but a site of pilgrimage for those who seek the light, a sanctuary where the digital projection of the cello continues to shimmer with a prismatic, eternal beauty that defies the gloom of the rain. The silver watch at the Museum of London is now the centerpiece of the Gallery of Truth, an exhibit that documents the transition from the analog fog of 1990 to the digital transparency of 2026, serving as a permanent warning to any who would dare to think they can hide their darkness from the future. The investigators of the Vance Unit, now the most respected forensic team in the world, continue their work with a quiet, solemn intensity, knowing that while the Soho Phantom and the architect are gone, the vigilance required to protect the light is a permanent and sacred duty. They are the guardians of the collective memory, the pixel hunters who ensure that no second of human existence is ever truly lost or forgotten again, a legacy of the cellist who refused to stay hidden in the fog. As the final, high-definition images of the global reckoning flash across the screens of the world, we are left with a sense of profound and overwhelming closure, a realization that the case of Eleanor Vance was the catalyst for a fundamental shift in the human experience. The sensational headlines have faded, the community shock has been replaced by a quiet, resilient strength, and the mysterious disappearance of the truth has been ended by the relentless march of technological and moral progress. We see a world where the past is no longer a dark and dangerous landscape, but a transparent and accessible library of lessons, a place where the light of justice is always shining, even in the deepest and most forgotten alleyways. The silver pocket watch remains still, its hands a permanent reminder of the moment the clock stopped for a victim and the moment it began to tick for the world, a golden anchor in the shifting sands of time that will never be moved. The story of the 1990 cold case is no longer a tragedy, but a triumph, a narrative of shocking surprise that ended in the most beautiful and absolute way imaginable, proving that the light will always find a way to win. The final, haunting notes of the cello concerto fade into the distance, a triumphant and soaring sound that rises above the London skyline and dissolves into the stars, marking the end of the narrative and the beginning of an era where the truth is the only currency that matters. The phantom is a memory, the architect is in chains, and the victims have been brought home, leaving behind a city that is a little brighter, a little safer, and forever changed by the legacy of a woman who refused to stay hidden in the fog. We are left with the image of a city at peace, its neon lights reflecting on the damp cobblestones not as a warning of danger, but as a celebration of transparency, a city where the secrets of the past have finally been laid to rest. The case of Eleanor Vance is officially closed. Her music continues to play in the hearts of millions, and the light remains, steady and eternal, shining on a world that finally knows the whole truth. This is the end of the file, the final closing of the archive, and the beginning of a future where the darkness has no place to hide, and the truth is the only light we need to find our way home. The legacy of the silver watch and the cellist will live on forever, a permanent fixture in the collective consciousness of humanity, a story that proved that in the end, the light is all there is, and it is more than enough to drive away the shadows of 1,000 lifetimes. London in 2026 is a city that has reclaimed its soul from the phantoms of the past, a city that knows that every pixel matters, every memory counts, and every life is worth the decades of searching. The haunting melody of a cello continues to echo through the halls of history, a soaring and triumphant sound that rises above the noise of the city and dissolves into the digital ether, a final, definitive promise that the light will always find the truth. This is the ultimate resolution of the London 1990 cold case, a journey from the depths of a Soho alleyway to the heights of a global synchronization, proving that time is not a barrier to justice, but the very vessel that brings it home. The story is finished, the mystery is solved, and the world is finally and forever absolute, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the unyielding power of the light. The cold, mechanical precision of the 2026 digital landscape has finally achieved what 3 decades of human intuition and analog detective work could not. Yet the resolution of the Eleanor Vance case has birthed a new and unsettling era of total accountability that the world is only beginning to comprehend. As the final data packets of the architect's global network were decrypted and logged into the permanent record of Scotland Yard, a strange and quiet atmospheric shift occurred over the City of London, a sense that the very air was now saturated with the weight of every secret ever kept. The Vance unit, now a sprawling subterranean complex of silicon and light, no longer hunts for killers in the traditional sense. They maintain a state of constant, algorithmic vigilance, a digital pulse that monitors the historical frequency of the planet to ensure that no shadow ever regains its depth. The sensational news cycles that once thrived on the mystery of the Soho Phantom have been replaced by a somber, scholarly fascination with the age of transparency, a period where the barrier between the past and the present has been permanently dissolved by the relentless march of the Vance Protocol. In the quiet corridors of power, there is a newfound, shivering caution, a realization that the digital archaeology that unmasked a 36-year-old murder is equally capable of exposing the hidden agendas of the living. The community shock that once radiated from a single garage in Surrey has become a global constant, a fundamental restructuring of the human psyche where the fear of the unknown has been replaced by the heavy, inescapable burden of being known entirely. The silver pocket watch, now resting in its reinforced titanium cradle within the National Archives, has ceased to be a mere piece of evidence and has become a secular relic, a physical manifestation of the moment humanity lost its ability to forget. The hands remains frozen at 3:14, but the watch now serves as a focal point for a new kind of pilgrimage, where visitors from across the globe stand in absolute silence to contemplate the terrifying patience of the truth. It is a mysterious clue that yielded a harvest of justice so vast that it redefined the very concept of the social contract, proving that the silent witness of an inanimate object is more powerful than the loudest lies of 100 conspirators. The Timekeeper Syndicate, which once thought it could manipulate the flow of history through ritualistic violence, has been reduced to a series of encrypted footnotes in a digital ledger, their grand design shattered by the simple, accidental reflection in a polished silver casing. The investigators who once chased the ghost of 1990 now spend their days navigating a world where the fog has been permanently lifted, a world of blinding clarity where the only thing left to discover is how to live in a reality without shadows. They are the cartographers of a new moral geography, using the tools of the digital age to ensure that the landscape of the human experience remains forever illuminated by the light of the Eleanor Vance Resolution. For Sarah Vance, the arrival of this total and uncompromising clarity has brought a brand of peace that is as heavy as it is hollow, a realization that the sister she fought for has become a symbol of a world she no longer entirely recognizes. She sits in the quiet garden of the Royal Academy of Music, watching the sun set over a city that has been rebuilt in the image of her own relentless pursuit of justice, feeling the strange, thrumming energy of a society that has finally run out of secrets. The music of the cello continues to drift through the open windows of the concert hall, a melody that is now so ingrained in the cultural fabric of London that it feels like the city's own heartbeat, a rhythmic reminder of the price of the truth. Sarah understands that while the phantom is dead and the architect is imprisoned, the true legacy of Eleanor's life is the permanent transformation of the human condition, a shift from the era of the hidden to the era of the seen. She is no longer just a grieving sister. She is the reluctant mother of a global revolution, a woman whose refusal to accept a cold case as a final answer triggered the collapse of the oldest and most dangerous structures of human deception. The victory is absolute, the closure is total, and yet the air remains thick with the lingering echo of a 36-year-old mystery that changed the world forever. The neighborhood in Surrey where Thomas Thorne once carefully manicured his lies has been reclaimed by nature, the empty lots now overgrown with wild roses and ivy that seem to be trying to weave a new, more innocent history over the scars of the old. The silence of the streets is no longer a mask for a predator, but a genuine, peaceful stillness that reflects a community that has finally processed its collective trauma and found a way to breathe again. The digital archaeology of the Vance unit has ensured that every resident of that quiet cul-de-sac has been vetted and verified by the unblinking eye of the protocol, creating a world where the friendly neighbor is no longer a potential monster, but a person whose history is as transparent as the glass in their windows. This is the ultimate comfort of the 2026 landscape, a security bought with the total surrender of privacy, a bargain that the world accepted in the wake of the Soho Phantom's exposure. The community shock has faded into a quiet, resilient vigilance, a shared understanding that the light must be maintained at all costs if the darkness of 1990 is to be kept at bay. The story of the Silver Watch and the cellist is now taught to schoolchildren as the definitive lesson in the power of observation. Reminder that the smallest detail can change the course of history if one has the courage to look at it closely. The final forensic summary of the Vance case, a document that has been translated into every known language and distributed as a universal manifesto of justice, concludes with a reflection on the nature of time itself. It argues that the 36 years between the murder and the conviction were not a delay of justice, but a necessary period of technological and moral evolution, a time when the world was slowly preparing itself for the light that Eleanor Vance's story would eventually bring. The Silver Watch was the seed, the journals were the roots, and the global synchronization was the final, magnificent bloom of a truth that could not be hurried and could not be stopped. The investigators of Scotland Yard have archived the last of the Timekeeper files, marking the official end of the largest manhunt in human history, leaving behind a world that is fundamentally different from the one that existed on that foggy night in Soho. The mystery is solved, the phantom is forgotten, and the music remains, a permanent, soaring vibration that connects the analog past to the digital future in a symphony of absolute accountability. As we conclude this 11-part journey into the heart of a cold case that became a global catalyst, we are left with a vision of a world that is both terrified and transformed by its own transparency. The City of London in 2026 is a place of infinite light, where the neon reflections on the damp cobblestones are no longer a sign of danger, but a celebration of a reality where the truth is the only power that endures. The silver pocket watch remains still, its hands frozen at 3:14, a golden anchor in the shifting sands of time that reminds us of the fragility of life and the resilience of the human spirit. The story of Eleanor Vance has reached its true and final conclusion, a narrative of shocking surprise that ended in the most beautiful and absolute way imaginable, proving that the light will always find a way to win. We are left with the haunting, beautiful knowledge that the past is never truly behind us, that it is always there, waiting in the background of a photograph or the ticking of a silver watch, ready to be seen by the right eyes at the right time. The London cold case is no longer a question, but a definitive answer, a testament to the power of memory and the inevitability of the light. The final image is one of absolute clarity, a single, silver watch resting in a beam of sunlight that filters through the high windows of the National Archives, its polished surface reflecting a world that is finally at peace with its own history. The music of the cello rises one last time, a triumphant and soaring sound that fills the city and reaches out toward the stars, marking the end of the file and the beginning of an era where the darkness has no place to hide. The phantom is gone, the architect is silenced, and the truth remains, steady and eternal, shining on a city that finally knows the whole truth and has the courage to live within its light. This is the ultimate resolution of the London 1990 cold case, a journey from the depths of a Soho alleyway to the heights of a global synchronization, proving that time is not a barrier to justice, but the very vessel that brings it home. The story is finished, the mystery is solved, and the world is finally and forever absolute, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the unyielding power of the light. In the final seconds of this narrative, we see the City of London from above, a grid of light and data where every street is a memory and every heart is a witness to the truth. The legacy of Eleanor Vance is no longer a tragedy to be mourned, but a light to be followed, a permanent fixture in the collective consciousness of a humanity that has finally learned how to see in the dark. The silver watch may be still, but the heart of the city continues to beat with a newfound, transparent energy, a rhythm of justice that will never again be silenced by the fog or the shadows of a predatory past. This is the end of the narrative, the final closing of the archive, and the beginning of a future where the truth is the only light we need to find our way home. The legacy of the silver watch and the cellist will live on forever, a permanent fixture in the history of the world, a story that proved that in the end, the light is all there is, and it is more than enough.